I'd like to call the Plan Commission meeting to order on Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025 at 5:31 PM. Roll call, Harf. Here. Heidler.
Here.
Champeau. Here. Bell.
Here.
Kane is excused. Berto here. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Motion by Champeau.
Second.
Second by Harf. All in favor?
Aye.
Carried. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the March 25th as presented in our packet? Any comments, corrections?
Just have a couple questions that are, and forgive me as I'm getting caught up to speed on things. They mentioned in there on page 4 about the revisions being completed before the board meeting. Did that get done? On line 26, page 4.
Page 4.
So all the required revisions are made to the comprehensive plan as well as the future land use mapping.
Yes. Yes.
That did get done. All right.
That was it?
Yeah, the others are just side questions.
Okay.
Can wait.
Did I have a motion and a second?
Motion.
Motion by Hart,
Second.
second by Champeau. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Carried. Comments, correspondence, and concerns from the public. Before we get started, for those joining us, we have a new member with us tonight, Mr. Skip Heidler. Thank you. Is there anybody that would like to speak to the Plan Commission on a non-agenda issue? Move on to item 5, development agreement, 11-unit hotel with managers unit, Chalet Lane, Hoffman Families Investment Properties LLC.
Okay, so the members have received a copy of the staff report and the draft development agreement. Just for the public's benefit, this was discussed at last month's meeting. And we discussed moving forward with a development agreement with some changes to the previous development agreement. There was one prior that had expired, so the Hoffmans were back looking to renew that, but there were some changes. This was an 11-unit hotel with managers quarters. The previous approval did not have those manager quarters. And then we also required that all trees in the building site in excess of 6 inches in diameter would have to be replanted elsewhere on the site. No parking allowed on Chalet Lane. We addressed some lighting concerns that we had and some concerns regarding the road. Since that time, the Hoffmans attorney did send us a letter, which was emailed to everybody. I'm not sure if you saw that.
Nope.
So I do have a copy.
Was it just today?
Yes, I do have a copy here for you.
Do they have issues?
So I'll read that real quick.
Oh,
Or
because
I'll
if
just
they
reference
didn't,
it.
if they didn't get back to us in time, I don't want to do this on the fly. I think it should be postponed until next month.
Well,
I
Mr.
mean,
and
we have a
Mrs.
deadline for,
Yeah, Mr. and Mrs. Hoffman did, reach out to me maybe about 2 weeks ago about their concern about the timeline to completion and the fact, but the part of the agreement that talks about if it's not done by May 20th, 27, that the agreement would be void and the minimum assessed value payments would be required. And then, so we had talked about that and I said, well, you're gonna have to ask the Plan Commission about that. We can't waive that. That's standard on all of our development agreements. So then we received this letter today asking that that be struck from the development agreement. That was the only change the attorney had made to the development agreement. But Mr. and Mrs. Hoffman are here and could perhaps add some more information about that, why they request that.
Can I speak? Basically with the economy doing what it's doing and nobody knows what's gonna happen in the next month or week or years. We just, and then the attorney brought up a good point that said, well, if you and your wife, God forbid, were killed in a car accident, your children would be left with owing taxes on a, over $3 million piece of land, which is worth a couple $100,000 at best. So I wasn't thinking from that perspective. I was thinking from if this economy continues to go south, we don't want to be stuck with paying and not being able to build it. We want to be stuck with paying taxes on something that's we weren't able to do. That's the only change that we had. We're fine with everything else.
Well, it has been a standard for any development in the village. From my perspective, developers get 2 years to build their project. And I mean, you were here last month. There were signs on what was going on with the economy, not knowing what's going to happen.
The tariffs weren't on yet.
I mean, if you're unsure, we can, Julie, would there be a way that we could postpone this for 60 days and change then from May to July or something of 2027, giving them a little bit of
We could, yeah.
time to see what happens.
If that's what the commission wants to do, we could approve it with an effective date out into the future. And I just wouldn't bring it forward to the board until it's closer to that time, that date.
What do you think about a 60-day window?
I mean, that's hopefully will be enough time. This could all be over next week. Who knows? I don't think we've ever gone through something like this. And when we started planning this project again, everything was moving pretty well with the economy. And I think to revisit it in 60 days would be fine.
Okay. Other plan commission comments, concerns?
I think some of the history on why that's in there is, as we've had many years ago, there were some developments that were happening that did not have that minimum assessed value. And the village's concern is there'll be a project started and it won't get finished, or it'll be stalled out. And then we don't have a lot of recourse. So that's the logic behind it. I guess if 60 days is adequate, that's great. That's a great compromise.
So if we,
Sorry. Amber alert.
we make a recommendation to make the date
We could have,
July 2027, not bring it to the board until our July meeting. And in the meantime, if the Hoffmans find that 60 days is not enough, then it can come back to the plan commission that month. And we'll talk about what's going on and what you think at that time.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
so that it has been approved, but will not go to the board until the July meeting. And if the Hoffmans feel that the economy has not improved within 60 days and they need more time to come back to the planning commission.
Yes.
Is there time for discussion? So you have some
Yep.
additional questions. You referenced some changes to the lighting. Are those different than what was in the packet that came to us?
It is, so the development agreement explains the lighting that was in there didn't have a pole in there. It didn't have the details about the pole. And what we wanted to do and what we put into the development agreement was language to make sure The Hoffman's parking lot lighting would be the same as other projects we have approved in the village. So it was,
And I saw reference to Eagle and to the
right,
Black Center.
right, so that was added in there, into the development agreement saying, hey, we don't really care. I hate to use this term, but we, you know, we really don't care what's on your plan. This is what you're gonna have to do. And that's why that gets put into the development agreement to make sure that that is exactly what is put out there.
Because that was one of the areas that, I took time to go by the property. And lights on 20-foot poles. Seem like overkill for a parking lot that size. Will probably have a very severe impact on the neighbors right to the north that are in a residential zone. The woods in between there is almost all deciduous trees, so 6 months out of the year, there's no leaves. They're gonna be seeing a lit up parking lot on the adjacent commercial property. So I didn't know if there were options that you might consider to change lighting on that to make it a little less invasive. I mean, right now with the grading that they're showing, the lights will be 17 feet above what the road grade is currently. So it's gonna be sticking up there pretty high. One of the other things that I noticed in looking through it is that the overall height of the building is not given, only height to the eave. And that doesn't really allow for roof on there and keeping it within our 35-foot maximum height.
Yeah, the plan, so the building plans themselves were the ones that were approved the last time, so. We just,
Was that under old zoning?
um,
And it was done 2 years ago.
No, we haven't changed anything on the height.
Because if you look at the height on there, they're from bottom of grade to the bottom of the eave is 34 feet 4 inches or something.
that's a pretty tall building.
But then you got roof above that. So the building height is gonna exceed 35 feet.
I believe, there are portions of the building, depending where you measure, that's true. That project was approved when. I think at that time we allowed averaging along the. Or when it was submitted, the code still allowed averaging along, the foundation where you're measuring it. We didn't change how you measure the height until I think it was. The last board meeting, or maybe the board meeting before that. So they got in right.
So doesn't starting, and this is my just catching up to speed here, doesn't starting the agreement again, start everything at ground zero?
No, what we have to do is kind of, but we apply the rules in effect at time of application.
Okay.
So when he applied, if the rule said something different, that's what we're sticking with.
Okay, that's,
And then-
I didn't find that listed anywhere, so
Yeah,
these are all practices that I'm learning, so.
but on the light poles, that is a condition that is. The plan commission put on, that's not in the code anywhere. That was like an extra condition. So if we want to change that, now is the time to do that before that development agreement is finalized and sent to the board. And if the motion passes to send it to the July board meeting, now is the time to change that,
Okay, so that's why, so I'm correct in asking questions.
right? Yes,
Okay,
Can I ask what the height of those poles are at those two businesses that you mentioned?
they're just as we have in the development agreement, 20 feet.
and my question to you, not trying to be contradictory or, raise questions is that necessary in that environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty small parking lot to your point, and
Yeah, and
I would
when you've got,
15, 16, 17 feet would be adequate. But
yeah, and you've got 3,000 K lights, which are a fairly white light. And fairly high lumen counts on those 2 on each end.
Sure.
I was just wondering if there might be options to do it where it'd be less invasive.
We wouldn't object to going with the short people.
Another question was they list using pressure treated framing on the decks and that, and then a synthetic decking above. Is that gonna be shielded on the fronts and ends? Cause I assume that the decking they're using is, be compatible with the colors of the rest of the building.
Correct. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's shielded or not.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really have drawings, or I have not seen drawings to know, but just the option there of, either using something compatible, because there is brown or green pressure treated material.
And if I could also just mention that you mentioned the residential property next to the To the north.
To the north, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's our property as well. So,
So you have both properties on either side?
no, not the ones with all the trees like the,
Well, that's
To
what
the
I'm talking
north,
about.
yeah.
The one to the south I know is in your family trust name, and then the property you're talking about here is an investment trust.
Yeah.
But the residential one to the north is one I was talking about.
yeah,
And that's why if you were to drop the lights, it would have a lot less impact.
yeah, and we wouldn't have an issue doing that.
You guys wanna reduce the height of the pole?
Yes, I do. I think it should be reduced in.
Because we don't,
Neighbors.
was, I can't remember and I don't want to scroll through the whole thing. Was there a lighting plan in here, with the lumens and the, and it didn't say what the height was on that lighting plan? Because it had to have been,
The lighting in this packet for this meeting and the previous plan.
this one.
This packet showed them at 20 feet. It showed, pretty significant
It's page 15.
lumens on those two pole lights. And then much, less invasive lighting on the building itself.
And Julie, I believe that Bayland based that on what the requirements were for the village.
But right now it's not to exceed 20. What height do we think we would want there then instead of 20?
I don't see a plan in here that shows. Normally we get a picture of the piece of property with the lighting wherever it is, and then it's the lumens and how, you know, they come out. I don't see that in here.
Right, we get a photometric plan on this
Thank
one.
you.
Yeah, on this one, we at the last meeting had told him that we were okay with what he had in the packet, if I remember right. However, we wanted to have further conditions on the poles. And he was not instructed to come back with a new plan for the poles. We just had put the conditions on that the poles not exceed 20 feet, and then with the language that you see in the draft development agreement.
I mean, I don't know that I can say a certain 16, 18 feet is appropriate if it's not tall enough with the two on either side to cover the area that they need covered. So I think, my inclination would be is make it as short as possible to get the coverage that you need, with a max of the 20.
Nothing to exceed.
But I think
20.
we should add that wording to this development agreement then. That we would prefer it lower if,
Page 46 of our package shows the lighting.
Again, we'd be fine with the minimum height to provide enough light.
Would be the height would be lowered, or the pole height would be lowered to meet the illumination requirement, but in no case exceed 20 feet. Is that the consensus of the whole committee? Or do you
Yes.
want condition?
do you have more, Skip?
No, it sounds like the other things were covered previously and are covered in the previous agreement, so.
So there was a motion and a second on that?
No, we didn't
No,
have a motion
okay.
and a second on it, but it would be, as we stated, and then to also include that language about the pole height. Would be the motion.
Okay, somebody care to make that?
I make that motion.
Second.
Motion by Shampo, second by Bell. Any further discussion?
Can I just mention that this gentleman was kind enough to mention that they are wrapped. the
rendering.
in the rendering.
All those in favor respond with an aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Agenda item 5B, change of use and architectural review, Waterfront Museum 10697 North Bay Shore Drive, Sister Bay Historical Society.
Okay, for this one, we did receive a letter, it came yesterday and that was emailed to you, so hopefully you've all received that letter from Bjorn Johnson.
Yeah. we received it.
We did
From
receive that from
Bjorn.
Bjorn.
Yes.
Some of you have not, so I'll read that real quick. We are the former owners of the boathouse and the owners of the only abutting private property and parking lot to this property. Regardless of whatever the zoning code may legally require of certain parking minimums, the practical and everyday parking realities do not always match exactly what the code's text directly regulates or envisions to accomplish. As such, we are left with effectively bearing a public parking burden which in all fairness should be borne by the public as a whole. In light of those realities and ongoing concerns, we believe there are several aspects of the proposed museum project which, at the very least, ambiguously reaches the bare minimum for parking compliance under the zoning code. Because the use of land is changing to a museum, additional parking spaces generally must be constructed to meet the minimum number of spaces required of a museum of this size. The rule is museums need 1 space per 250 square feet of gross floor area plus 1 space per employee. Based on the currently depicted floor layout of this museum, the rule would require approximately 7 spaces based on gross floor area, and then 1 additional space for the employee volunteer, bringing the general total to 8 required parking spaces. However, the B3 district grants a categorical reduction of 3 spaces, which would bring the minimum to 5 required spaces. And then assuming the current 2 spaces on site would count towards and thus further reduce this requirement to 3 spaces, there is still yet another exemption in B3 down to 0 required spaces when the parking requirement is not more than 3 spaces. Thus, under this somewhat strained reasoning, the current proposed museum project would meet the zoning code's minimum parking requirements. However, the above method of calculation at best results in a heavily ambiguous conclusion in the village's favor to not need additional parking spaces for this project. And because of this incredibly close call compliance, we are noting several points for the commission's further acknowledgement, further knowledge and consideration. First, to reiterate, the practical and everyday parking realities do not always match exactly what the code requires. If parking demand created by this new land use becomes higher than what is speculated by village staff, then especially at the height of the tourist season, this parking demand will inevitably become another burden onto our neighboring parking lots. As such, we will be closely monitoring whether there will be increased parking burdens shifted onto our parking lot as a result of this museum. Second, as of this year, we have adopted and have now enforced a new charge policy for all adjacent and unaffiliated commercial usage of our traditionally free access parking lots. This policy is being applied to those who do not themselves have parking availability in fact or parking compliance per code. As part of our ongoing monitoring of this new museum, we will be assessing whether the museum will also need to be subject to this new charge policy. Third, while we are granting the village the benefit of the doubt for this particular project, this does not waive nor sufficiently address our future concerns for all other village projects adjacent to our property posing similar parking problems. In particular, are the changes being proposed to the village hall. We will continue to monitor these proposed changes, and we hope the Village and Plan Commission will address our concerns more thoroughly for a project that is not as ambiguous and is more parking significant in its effects. Lastly, the village cannot continue to heighten its parking enforcement expectations of others while simultaneously dodging its own obligations to follow its own parking rules for its own projects. Fairness dictates that either everyone follow the law, including the village, or the law means nothing but plain favorites. But to reiterate our main point, the practical and everyday parking realities do not always match the code requirements. So in the future, the village needs to equally apply that practical wisdom to private projects that are not just its own. We welcome any questions or calls for discussion, and sincerely, Al Johnson Swedish Restaurant and Boutiques Incorporated, the Johnson Family Trust. I will add that this was talked about very briefly at the Marina Committee over various meetings. I know the marina and, we have a member of the marina committee here that might be able to add to this, but the marina committee has not required parking for the uses down at the marina. So we have vendors, we have people that rent boats, we have people that rent jet skis, we have boat tours, and we have not required those vendors to have parking. So it's kind of been the thought down there that if it's something that a pedestrian would maybe park and go numerous places or maybe stroll about, not to require parking for that particular use. In this case, the boathouse parking lot does have 38 feet of width, so they have enough for 3 cars and then a sidewalk. It's 38, let me clarify that, it's 38 feet, but part of that should be reserved for a sidewalk on the parking lot, leaving room for 3 cars. So you would have 3 cars for the museum. So you'd have 1 for the volunteer and then 2 for anybody that might drive down to the museum. The thought, of course, was that most of it would be pedestrian traffic. You're strolling through the park, you're at the village hall, you're down by the marina, and you happen to stumble across it and walk into the museum. So that was kind of the thought on that.
You're saying the part that's for pedestrians would be the part that's closest to the building? So you're like, okay. But that, right now, it's in conflict with cars very typically in season, because there's not any delineation there. So
Right,
that makes a lot of
we'd
sense.
want to delineate that as a sidewalk, but even with that delineated, there is room for 3 cars down there, so.
Mhm.
So the committee's gonna, but we're getting ahead of ourselves, so everyone's received the proposal in the packet. This proposal has been at the Marina Committee for quite a while. I know the John Blossom is here and he represents a group that's been working with the Historical Society. Terry Wolf is here from the Historical Society as well. In summer of 22 is when the whole idea of using that boathouse has been kind of resurrected. And it was in 2022 that the thought first came up, well, what if that was actually a museum? You had the Bunda boat in there, but then there were other displays in there. At one time, this group thought, well, maybe the second story would be like a club of some sort. That has all changed. The entire building, the lower level would have the boat and exhibit space. The second floor would have 3 exhibit rooms that you could go between. John did tell me that the architect did look at the building and they have determined that an elevator was not required for that space. So with
How is it not
That was what-
required? Because that's my question.
yeah, John might be able to go a little further. Mark Isaacson is their architect and he had told them they did not need an elevator. Other notes, just things you didn't have in your packet. No walls will be removed on the second floor. We will be using the building as is for now. So I'm thinking maybe because it's as is, it doesn't, I don't know. The storage room on the ground floor will be removed to provide more exhibit space on the ground floor. They're working quickly to replace the cracked window that is upstairs and install a new hurricane force protected sliding door on the second floor. That would precede any large construction activity that they take on. The architect has asked them to remove 100% of the current siding and replace it over with new Tyvek protection and insulation and then siding. So the building has had some wear and tear, and this group has stepped forward and said, we'll do the renovations to the building. The last estimate I heard, John, was about $300,000 is that they would be putting into this building to convert it
Yes.
into a museum and upgrade it.
That's what we expect, yes.
Okay, so with that, that's all I have. And maybe John could provide more information or Terry.
Well, I'd certainly comment on the parking question. In my greatest imagination of what we're going to accomplish with this, I don't think it's going to be a destination museum. It's not big enough to be a destination museum. And we don't expect people to come driving there and parking to go to visit this, frankly, relatively small museum. We want to leverage the waterfront and enhance the boardwalk experience of people parking down at the south end of the waterfront park and walking that boardwalk up to the marina. Be part of that. Be part of the experience that people who go on the tour boat that is very popular. We expect some of those people will, when they finish or before they go on their event, that they would come and maybe visit this because of the proximity. And someone suggested, I know that Mr. Johnson is in the group, but someone has suggested that there may be some people who, when they check in at Al Johnson's and have a 45-minute wait or a 1 hour wait for breakfast, may want to walk down there and take a look at the museum while they're there. So in general, the kind of advertising, the kind of space that we have, we don't really think it's going to draw a lot of destination parking. Be happy to answer.
I don't trust Henry. But I guess I would want to hear from our building inspector that we do not need an elevator.
They are going to have to get, a state permit because they're doing a change of use in that building. So the state is gonna require, and especially when moving the wall, they're gonna need, state building plan approval on that. That is something after we approve the land use, it goes on to. That always comes after we issue our land use and development agreements that they then pursue the building permit. With the
And we're
inspector.
not trying, Denise, we're not trying to avoid an elevator. If an elevator is necessary, we'll have to put that in and fund it. But the architect's view of it so far, from based upon his experiences, that we won't need it. And part of that is because of very limited occupancy up on that second floor. We don't want to have 20 people up there, even probably generally 2, 4, 5, 6, maybe 10, because of the basically, it's just not that big.
No, we could require that before it goes to the board.
I am not comfortable. I think it's a great plan. I've supported it. It's a way to talk about our history, and Parks has also been working with the Historical Society on what do we call it? The signs.
Signage, historical signage.
Historical signage. So I think this just works with everything else that we're trying to do. But if we would need to do an elevator, I want to know that. I want to see that plan before I would approve it. Is it outside? Is it inside the building? Does it change anything? Does, the Marina Committee feel differently now? Everything gets touchy. Now I understand that they will take ownership. The Historical Society will take ownership.
So we would need a contract with the Historical Society where we would still, the Marina Committee would still own the marina, would still own the building and the property, but they would be doing a long-term lease with the Historic Society.
So you're talking about a municipality owning a piece of property. I don't care who we lease it to. And my experience over the last 30 years is you have to have, and so I'm just uncomfortable. I like it, I want it to move forward, but I need to be assured that we do not need an elevator.
And
Well, Denise, I can promise you that if as we move forward with the state and with our architects work on this, if we have to have an elevator, we obviously will bring that information back to you and put in the elevator.
Well, what we could do is, give them some assurance that yes, we support this, provided that the elevator is addressed and it's not on the outside of the building.
Yeah,
Which would give them enough assurance to go expend the money to proceed with getting the state permit. And then provided they can get that state permit after that date, we could issue our approval.
I mean, also, part of that, I mean, an ADA compliant bathroom is also a pretty big expense on there, and like, I don't, even if that is an ADA compliant bathroom on the second floor, if it's, you can't get there with an elevator, is it really ADA compliant? So I'm good with this plan as long as we don't have that, and I think what you're saying, Denise, is if the municipality owns it, municipality is the deepest pockets, and if somebody decides that you need to be in compliance with ADA, it's ultimately gonna fall back to the municipality. So I don't
And I
think
think
any
an
issue.
elevator on the outside will just,
No, we would, under no circumstances would we want to put an elevator on the outside. In fact, one of the things we want to do is clean up the outside. As you may know, there's a really pretty ugly accommodation for electrical service that on the outside of that building on the east side that we want to get rid of. And so we don't want, we wouldn't consider putting an elevator on the outside of that building.
that's how I would like to proceed. I don't know how anybody else feels.
How has the Marina Committee addressed the current revenue expense related to that building and the proposal going forward?
I tried to look up the minutes, but March and April's minutes were not on the website yet. So I called Julie to make sure that the Marina Committee had given their approval because I could not find that. And she said at their last meeting,
Yeah, it was discussed at the last meeting, that part still has not been resolved and would be addressed during the contract phase of it. But, you know, it's been talked about several meetings on what are we gonna do about the lost revenue, because right now you rent it. And you get about $18,000 a year by renting the upstairs of that room of that boathouse. You know, there's been some comments that, well, they're putting $300,000 in, so that's money the marina didn't have. The marina had budgeted $45,000 for repairs. They're not gonna have to invest that, so they're ahead that way. But there's still ongoing discussions when we get to the contract part of it about the lost revenue.
Because
So-
this is village property. The people of the village own it, and if they're losing revenue, it should be replaced in some way.
Right, and the Marina Committee felt that way as well.
because it doesn't come into the general fund.
I know, I
Okay.
know it's the marina's its own thing.
Yeah.
Julie, can I make or Denise, make a comment about the Marina Committee meeting?
Sure.
So I'm on the Marina Committee, and yeah, we definitely discussed, actually, we discussed an amount, Julie, you probably remember that. That they would pay us on a monthly basis. We just didn't, and I don't want to say this in open session, we didn't discuss the exact amount, but written in the contract would be some compensation, yeah. Whether or not it's going to be 18,000 or whatever, right now, even if we wanted to, we couldn't rent it. It's not in the shape that we could have rented it somewhere anyway. But we fully recognize that there needs to be that, but we also recognize that they're gonna put 300,000, and if there's an elevator involved, even more. You know, but to have, you know, a museum that would celebrate, you know, the Sister Bay's nautical and nautical history. And whether it's the marina or whether it's the village, that would take an awful long time for us to be able to do it. So we would foresee that, yeah. So if, you know, if it had, I don't know if it needs to come back to us, if an elevator does need to come get in there, because it'll change the design inside.
But I would think that if the Marina Committee is the first step, they've got to fully embrace the whole project in its completeness before it comes to us and then to the village board.
Mhm. And we did, that's why it came to plan, because before it goes to, it's got to go through a lot more, even more with plan before it goes to the board. And that would have everything to do with, as Denise said, whether it's an elevator and then if it is, the plans change. If it needs to come back to us, great.
Terry, did you have anything further to add? You're muted, Terry.
Yeah, thanks. On the issue of the amount that might be due, you mentioned, Julie, that some recognition might be appropriate for the investment of the 300,000. And John, you can supplement what I say here, but I think another line of thinking is that the um, the money that's being put into this is to help preserve this as a community asset. And if we go back in time, and Denise, you would be the one who might remember this, but back in time a few years ago, when the project went for preserving the shadow was being discussed, I think there was discussion and documented discussion about um, the village's interest in supporting the idea of a waterfront museum as a civic asset on the waterfront. And so maybe, I'm not saying you should adopt this point of view, but at least it is another point of view that in consideration of this being a project really to benefit the village, not just a private project to benefit a group who's putting up the money for this thing, but a project that does in fact make this a true community asset, that there might be some reasonable consideration given for the village to lessen or even forego that quote lost revenue.
Thanks for saying that, Terry. And yeah, that's exactly what we hope. This is not going to be a museum that's going to charge people for admission. Every dollar that we can raise has to be used for exhibits and for the things that we're going to be doing there. So I said to the Marina Committee, if you demand that we pay X dollars, we'll figure out a way to pay X dollars. But we don't really think that that's fair to take a piece of property that at one time was even considered maybe it should be torn down, rehab it and turn it into a valuable asset for the community, a no charge museum. We think that adds a lot of value, and maybe that could be looked at as a quid pro quo for the foregoing of this supposed $18,000.
Honor Terry, would there be a free will donation canister or something that you would have there that could generate some income?
Definitely. The museum we want it to be free to the public at all the times. But that doesn't mean we wouldn't encourage people to make donations. But I don't think that the revenue from that kind of source is going to be meaningful. We've had a jar with some of this information displayed down at Yacht Works in their shop, and I think that the grand total of collection over a year and a half has been something like $190,000. I just want to say also editorially, I really love Sister Bay. I date back to when Kermit Kellstrom, it was Kellstrom's dock, and the Flushheim and the Iona used to go out of that spot. And I think that the fact that we want to commemorate Sister Bay as the center, Sister Bay is the center of commerce that it is, and the center of voting that it is because of what's happened on that waterfront. And I don't mean to start encouraging to try to throw any unfair flattery here, but if Denise Bordeaux had not spoken up and fought for the elimination of the motel at the end of that property, it wouldn't be what it is today. And we want people to know that, we want to celebrate that, and we want to expand on that.
Yeah, I did have one more question, and I don't know if this goes to you, Louise, or to John or Terry, but what are the thoughts on the ongoing expenses once it's up and running? There's obviously going to be electricity, heat. Is this all just going to be absorbed by the marina, or?
All the operating costs, Skip, we intend to have they are part of our budget. And one of our concepts is to create the Sister Bay Marina Club, which will have events at the marina area, and the people paying memberships to that will give us an annual support in addition to the normal solicitation of additional donations. So we expect to be 100% responsible for the operating costs, which include insurance, repair, upkeep. Let's say in 7 or 8 years, it needs a new roof. It's not your responsibility to buy the new roof. It would be ours.
By consensus, it sounds like everyone is in support of the project. However, we do want to make sure that we want the issue of the elevator and the restroom addressed before we make a recommendation to the board. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
By consensus, we're gonna agree to that. So they at least have assurance that this commission approves what they're doing. We just have those 2 issues. Those are the only issues that we have with the project. And assuming those are addressed, it would move forward to the board. Yes. Yep. Okay.
So if we can get those answers before next month's meeting, then we could move it forward to the board in May.
And we can ask our architect. Our architect is on a retainer agreement now that we have signed with him for spending up to pretty close to $10,000. I'm pretty sure that he'll be willing to put together the documentation for us and for you that says what we need to do.
That would be great. I would also like to have something from our building inspector.
Sure. John, you and I'll work on that. We'll
Okay.
connect you with the inspector, okay?
Perfect. Yeah, we're not trying to avoid anything. We want to do it properly.
Thank you. Okay, agenda item 5C, courtesy review, residential condominium, Highway 57, Alliance Construction, and Nicholas Dudley.
Okay, so, this is, you've received in your packet, and what is proposed is a residential development. More affordable homes, being set up kind of in a condominium format, but still following that cluster subdivision design we had discussed last year. The property, as you know, would be preserving a woodland. It would have an area for dogs. It would have green space with a pavilion for families. And there would be 51 units altogether on the property, which could be a mix of duplexes and triplexes. I did receive some more information. Mark Rukamp from Alliance, who is a co-developer or partner on this project. He did submit some preliminary plan review notes today that I just want to share with you. They don't change anything that is in the packet, but just some clarification about green space, impervious surface, things of that nature. So I am going to just pass that out quick.
While you do that, I just want to say to Nick and his bride, love it. Would like to talk about a few things, but love it.
Can I ask you, what, price range will these go for? Just average is,
Right now, the lots are the goal, from what I understand, this preliminary, $60,000 for the lot. Or for the unit, and I know that the price point goal is to be around $300 a square foot per build. And from what I understand, I've been in communication with Mark for months at this point. There's all add-ons and bonuses. Some of that stuff goes over my head, but obviously the price can go up from there. But am I right about that? That's the goal is.
Yeah, in general, there's the nuts and bolts that Julie just handed out does kind of talk about some of the unit information and on the preliminary side, what our targets are for some of the build cost. Not necessarily for the lot per se, but for the build cost of the actual residential units. And all of the information, I've done the best job that I possibly can at this point, without having obviously full-blown civil plans and all of those kind of things. But in anticipating all of the infrastructure costs and the the hard costs on the front end. So our goal would definitely be to try to keep the price point of the per unit for the land acquisition, if you wanna call it that, in that 60 to 70 range, which talking with, you know, Nick and some of the local people that deal in the real estate, for a residential lot aspect of things would be attractive, as far as that goes. But some of the other nuts and bolts are actually listed in there regarding the units and our targets that we're looking at for the unit mixes and cost.
I would like to point out, the lot was originally 15 acres when it was purchased from Barbara Hall. Marion was sold just over an acre, to add on to Rachel's pool project. And, last fall, maybe I jumped the gun on this, but what I did was to, and I had said this in a previous meeting, to move the property line of my farm in anticipation of a major road at some point. I quit claimed the 4 acres of woods and some of the field onto my farm property off of the 15, leaving 10 acres. I would like you to keep that in mind, that the goal or the idea for me is not to develop my farm. Obviously, that's not part of the development agreement per se. I'm not gonna negotiate with that, to take my word. But, you know, 4 acres, give or take, would have been undeveloped as part of this project either way. But to preserve the woods, I
Sure.
attached it to the farm.
So, does anybody have any questions or comments?
What mechanism are you gonna use to keep short-term rentals from being in there? You're gonna do like a deed restriction or what?
I met with, Mary Kay invited me down to speak to a group, a week and a half ago at the, Door County Housing. It was Door County Economic Development, but the housing portion of it. And in that meeting, I had expressed, my disinterest in wanting to put, and nothing against any of the groups, but, we're not gonna put a slogan or a tag of, affordable housing or VITA or anything like this on the project. I'm gonna do it the old fashioned way and do some owner financing stuff. With some lots that I'll be able to, or Mary and I will be able to retain. And I think we can be creative with the bank that I currently use as well. They're a part of this, they're a partner on this project. Fortified Bank out of Green Bay. So I feel like we have built a really great team, Mary Kay included, these gentlemen, my wife, Tyler, at Fortified Bank. And I've done an extensive amount of talking with both people in the community and people at large on how to keep certain tags off of it, but to really focus on, Julie had said there's 78 families that put forward names. I'm not saying we can accommodate all 78 families, but the goal is to put a focus to help people build equity. And whether that's through land contract, owner financing, or hopefully my bank will be creative with some of that, but very strict on the short-term rental. Mark and I discussed the idea of limiting it and taking away the second home idea. And not only does that possibly go over into legality issues, but it's also extreme micromanaging, you know, so I'm not promising that it isn't gonna be some people, and we need money, you know, to make this whole thing work. It can't be all, workforce development type of stuff. Does that make sense, Mark? Am I saying this right?
You're doing great.
Okay.
The one question I would have is, there's no way to connect this to the east right now. Is it possible to shift it around, so at some point, if there is something to the east in the future, there'd be a way to connect that?
The road?
Yeah.
Well, you're gonna need a different road, and I would assume you guys are gonna want something bigger than 33. And what I have done in anticipation of a different road, I'm hoping you all will allow this to be its own neighborhood, cul-de-sac in. And when the time comes, whether it's myself or Steve, my neighbor behind me, or Barbara Hull, you guys have a Phantom Road on the 20-year plan. I just ask that you keep it off of my original farm property, and if you guys wanna put a larger road in, whether that's gonna be, off of Rachel, and you guys wanna beef up the current road that would come in, then it would run the current easement that's in place, that both Barbara and I have through Rachel Works property, and then Barb has the easement that runs east-west out to her property. You're talking connecting the plateau idea.
Well, I'm saying like connect that to another, we're not having your cul-de-sac area be a public road, but just have another connection into there, so.
Well, what we had originally tried to do, I had approached Jim and Carol to purchase the 2.3 acre, 2.6 acre triangle. They're not interested in selling, and it probably turned into a blessing. We figured out that the village doesn't have a full easement right away. Otherwise, that was our goal, was to come in off of Applewood and give Chris the fire, this
Yeah.
thing that I clearly have become very aware of, that a lot of people would like to see it connect out. It's not even in the cards, because the village doesn't have a full easement right away through Applewood to connect to that property. So as soon as Mark pointed this out, or maybe, I don't know, she pointed it out, we walked on that idea and then used the original, easement off of the highway, through Rachel's. And in fairness to Rachel, I know she would rather see a full road, but, and it's a big but, if we were to go full road, we would ask for the village to help with that. You're talking 2 years to do that whole thing. So what I could see happening in the future is we get our development in, and the village decides at some point they want to help Barbara Hall's development on the backside, or you guys want to punch a road through. That's all fine and well. Maybe you spruce up the road we originally put in, and then you kick it towards my house, south, and you run that easement. Just remember, at that point, you're cutting down a lot of trees.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. And, so the attorney that I've used with this whole thing, he said, so if you don't eliminate the easement through, and if the village decides to put a road through at some point, or if Barb's developer does, that's a lot of the tree lot. There's nothing I can do about it at this point. I've done what I can, and, I guess done losing sleep over what the right thing to do is, how to preserve things, make the village happy, have it be an appropriate access off the highway. Make sure it's return of investment proper, meat on the bone for these guys who are gonna be putting up the actual cash, putting up land. These guys are coming to the table with everything else. It all has to make sense within S and a C.
So my understanding is that there's an option of either the roads becoming public roads, or this group can decide not to do that. Is that correct? Based on it being a planned unit development. What are the thoughts that have been discussed up to this point?
This is the first time that
Okay.
that we're talking about this particular plan.
Because in looking at this, I mean, my initial thought was that sharp bend in the northeast corner is probably not one you can get a fire truck around.
Well, the fire department would have to sign off on the site plan and the engineering and everything that was done so that they could get around.
So that may impact, I mean,
Well, keep in
it's
mind,
hard to tell.
To your point, the focus, we wanted you guys to see what the idea was, but the main focus before I had these guys spend any more time, money, energy on engineer or anything on their point was just to see if you guys were gonna let us put the road in, whether it was gonna be limited access or I call it either the 33 foot, which even if it wasn't my development, I believe that's the right thing for this type of, I'm trying to keep it rural, still living on the farm, I'm rural. I don't have to go far for it not to be rural, but Orchard is rural. Ava Hope or whatever that road is, the road that just looks, what is it? That looks crazy to me. I don't want that on next to me, I guess. That's not what I'm looking for. Is it gonna happen someday next to my farm? Maybe, but the focus I'm hoping is more on, can we put a limited access road in, and then we'll touch up and make everything else look up to code and part, and, all that kind of stuff when if you guys give us permission to move forward. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and that's really the kind of the opening statement that I would have started with, is the whole intent behind tonight. The concept is very close. But the big focus, like Nick's mentioned, was it's really the access, the site access. We know that that's the big play that we have to kind of know about. Additional input, general input that the board would have, we look forward to. That was the other real intent. Like Denise mentioned about had this being the first blush, so that you kind of had a feel. One of the big things that I don't wanna lose in the information, is when you look at what the allowable units and those kind of things. A lot of time has been spent, and a lot of the input behind that has really come from Nick and Mary. In the things that they would like to see, they've been, for years that I've been working back and forth with them, they've been trying to figure out a way to do the best that they can for some of the maybe more average families of the area. So what we're trying to do is leverage constructability, leverage infrastructure, and yet in order to bring the price point as effectively as we can to where it can be affordable, but yet at the same time, keeping some of the neighborhood amenities, some of the other things you see there, so that it's not just, a developer coming up to Sister Bay, trying to get the most out of Sister Bay as they can. That's not the intent of the development. We know that there's a need for this in Sister Bay. We're trying to connect the dots on how do we get there without tagging ourselves as, well, this is it's an affordable housing or low income housing type of development, but that's not the intent. We want to create a beautiful development that kind of fits what these guys have always thought, but just looking for those initial comments. But the access is the big question.
Skip, just to, talk a little bit about that, okay? So yes, the plan commission can require that to be a public road, or they can allow it to be a private road. It is up to the plan commission. When you're looking at a public road, the roads get much more expensive. If this road was going, through to a different property, I'm guessing the plan commission would probably require it to be a public road. When it contained within that property, and if it remains private, the costs go down significantly. Because of the access out to Highway 57, when the Plan Commission discussed that road over the past year, we discussed the fact that it's a limited access road because it's very narrow. It's only, you have certain roads are 50 feet, some are 60, this one is a 30-foot right away, which means it's limited access, which by our definition means it serves basically one property or one purpose. So that road, we wouldn't, it can't be bigger unless more land is purchased. And I think, like Nick said, if the village was going to require more land, then the village would have to discuss whether they're paying for that or not. So in this particular case, the village doesn't have any benefit to that road because it's not connecting to
Yes, not going
anything.
through anything.
So in this case, it would make sense that remained private, so it can be more affordable.
And I presume sewer and water will be run throughout with as many units.
There has to be. And then the laterals, so there is an aquatic center that was approved next door. And the agreement was if that limited access road ever goes through to the highway, at that time, the owner of the aquatic center has to give up their access onto Highway 57 and come in off of this road. And she's aware of that. But then Nick has also told me that he has had conversations. She has not forgot. She's still aware that would have to happen.
And it would then be a decision by this committee to go to any deviations from the codes, such as the garage frontage versus building frontage, that type of thing.
Right, so we still have to approve. So the first phase is, giving the, telling them tonight, yeah, we're okay with a private road. Yeah, we're okay, or we want to see a trailer on there, or we want to see more added in there. Then I work with them on the setbacks and the design, the engineering and everything. We still have to talk about the buildings that are going to be up there. Do the buildings meet code? For example, we don't allow a wall that is visible to the public to exceed 50 feet in length. We also, don't allow garages in front of buildings, so, you know, those are some of the things we have to talk about or go through yet. But today it's, and we can bring those up right now to give them direction, clearly.
And that was why I was raising the question, because it seems like there's a number of things here that are in contradiction to what the codes are.
Right, so we could talk about those now, so they have direction and they can address that now, to keep things moving along. I think the first thing to,
That's the easy stuff.
Yeah,
yeah, I think the first thing is the site, because once they start drawing that preliminary plat, that's a lot of engineering, that's a lot of money. So we want to give them any guidance we want that we can now, before they actually put the pen to paper on it.
And I mean, this looks like a fairly high density development.
It's actually not as dense as it could be.
Well, I know
So,
in
yeah.
number of units, I understand that. But when you compare it to even the adjacent property there, you know, it's significantly different. I do appreciate the fact that where the land is, it's not something that's gonna be just in your face as you come up 57. It's set back, it's, you know, that's gonna be a big advantage.
the true neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea, and it's something that her and I want to be proud of. We'll be the neighbors to it. In Maple, will be, Jim and Carol to a point, but we have the largest abutting piece of property to it, and that's where my kids hang out. That's where our garden is. That's where we are. So, I mean, if we can bring a neighborhood to our backyard, then the kids get friends that they would want to and don't have to cross them that way, I guess.
You don't have to drive them to get them somewhere. The discussion on the park and pavilion, is this intended to be primarily just for within those homes? Or is it something that would be used by the public as well? Since there's an adjacent public trail that would be connected.
Yeah,
to it.
the area, the neighborhood here would obviously be a conduit owners association. So with the land itself would be primarily be owned by the association itself. So that would be the main intent. Yeah, that would be my thought. The other thing that I don't want to have, I'm hoping you don't kind of miss, it's not real, like, standout. But I know there's been conversations about, walking and or possibly hiking trails and things like that. So we wanted to be kind of conscious of trying to create the flow of this where it would be able to flow in off of the private road coming in, kind of through our development. And then even with the ability that depending upon what happens going east, we kind of in that upper right-hand triangle, going to the east, we have an outlet where that could possibly connect to keep going. Just trying to build it as much as we can that would flow.
And that was where my question came from, is with it essentially connecting to the public trails, people would be finding their
Where's
way
the
in.
park? I mean, that's the way I.
Yeah.
look at
Yeah,
it, right?
so the park would be usable by
The park's
others.
a park, there's not gonna be somebody out there.
It's definitely, it'll still be a public space. Yeah.
I just don't envision, because there's not other parking built in. You know, so if people wanted to drive to go to this park, there's no real place for them to park.
Denise, this is hard to pick up on because it's a small piece, it explains the way it's laid out.
Are you telling me I'm wrong?
No, well, if you kind of look, there's, what we originally thought of was about having some parallel parking stalls along that side of the road. It's just because it's not real big, it's not easy to pick up.
Oh, is that what the curb cut back is?
Yeah, but we kind of, through talking with our civil engineer, who's designed a lot of this over the years, it actually would be more effective and take up a little less space if we, toward the northeast and southwest kind of corners, if we actually just brought in like 5 stalls on each side as a 90-degree to the road, it actually ends up being a little more cost effective and takes up less space, and then it's just easier to navigate. So we actually probably would, because we know that for the people, the residents that are going to be using this as their neighborhood reunions or birthday parties or whatever it is, they're going to have family members that are going to come from out of the area.
Sure,
So we do want to accommodate that.
okay.
And as
That's
Rachel's
excellent.
project continues to develop and get into the second and third phase, that will be a destination for families to bring kids. So I mean, to your point of the parking, while there's swimming lessons taking place or whatever's happening, that park is within walking distance to, and I'm not putting Rachel's parking lot out there right now, it's the means to park in it, but that's the synergy that I think we're trying to bring all together. And then I know she would love to see a white walking or a bike path come somewhere along hers, what was proposed on the 20-year plan type of thing. And again, I can't speak for Rachel on giving up any of her land, but I know what her wants, and she's with her all the time. So there's constant communication with Rachel.
Is this an appropriate time to discuss the garage furniture at all in what's proposed?
It's the first thing on my list, so
Okay.
go ahead.
That was just one of the things that I noticed that, I mean, we do have in the code's limitations on that, and these are exceeded, so that was why I was bringing. it
Yeah,
up.
it's a, I wouldn't say a simple redesign. But the garages really protrude out quite far. We need you to push them back to be compliant, with the code. Plus, I think it makes the building look better where you're not looking at a garage that's protruding, you're looking at the entranceway of someone's home that I think is more aesthetically pleasing, not just to those that live there, but the people in the development. So you had on here, total finished 1,500 square feet. I'm presuming that's the 1,500 feet does not include the garage.
Correct.
Okay. So that's a decent size. I was looking at, 3 of the other, apartment complexes here in Sister Bay, the Glen, J. Taylor, and Niagara Ridge. And, it's a nice size square footage. I think that's really just gonna be,
What is the minimum that we can go? Is it 900?
I think we changed it to 700, didn't we just change? Oh, that's our 4.
Yeah,
Never mind.
I believe R2 is 900. I think we have it listed in the nuts and bolts page.
Now, I can't speak for these guys, but my hope is that some of those middle units in the triplexes, we can focus on those to be the more affordable scenario. So a single parent with a kid or 2-bedroom, maybe you can get 1,000 square feet, and that would be a $300,000 purchase. You know, I floated these ideas to Mark, and again, you know, this is a partnership, so everything has to make sense. But
Right.
that's the kind of stuff that I've been pushing. They've never told me no really on anything, but that's the kind of stuff that I float out there is what can we do to make a few things smaller so it's more price point conscious for that type of specific buyer.
What we would end up doing was we bring back kind of a more of a final design, and just as a case in point that all the content or all the information that you're sharing with us tonight on your thoughts, our architect, Kevin Havlovitz, is actually in the room, so he's getting all of this firsthand as well, which is great. But that was part of like what Nick just alluded to. When we bring back kind of the final designs, we do plan to actually have like options. So that for our typical base unit, maybe a 2-bedroom, 1,500 square foot unit, on a single level. But that being said, we'll probably have some options in there where if somebody wants to add a 3rd bedroom, or if a millennial family, you know, they're in part of a first build and they would love to have a Jack and Jill bedroom, bathroom, loft. That's stuff that we're gonna come up with those designs and price points so that people can massage it just a little bit.
Sure.
So that would be part of that ongoing that we're gonna work on.
Okay.
But the triplex was really, even though I know there's not much of that maybe around here, that was intentional for the reason that Nick just said. We wanted to come up with a way to be able to create one unit that if they wanted it to be a little smaller, a little bit more, it's gonna be the most inexpensive unit to begin with.
Right.
And then that way, we're doing everything we can to try to, again, to create leverage the most efficiency for economy as we can.
This might, you know, I tend to go down the rabbit hole or get caught up in the weeds, but there are just things that stand out to me. Where do you plan on having the mechanicals? I don't see a specific room on the plan. Are they going to be in the garage? Is there,
Yeah, I mean, typically, and as you're looking at the plans, there's. When you come in from the garage, there's the utility room up like to the right,
yes,
like literally that double door to the left right there.
that's it?
For, yeah, for the size of what a single unit like this, even like for a split system. Furnace and water heater,
Okay,
yeah,
all right. So not storage.
but this is very, again, this
Yeah.
is the very preliminary idea.
Okay. Yeah, that's all that I really had. I think it's,
If I can
I'm
ask a
really
question.
excited about it. I think it looks great. I think it's needed. I think you are coming up, about this in the right frame of thought on, you know, doing something good for you and your family and the community, and making it a neighborhood and
They listened to our needs or our requests of the last multifamily where we said, you should have your own dog park on site, you know, you should. Or are you gonna have a playground out there? So I think, I don't know if you listened to all those meetings, but it sounds like you incorporated all of that in.
All the last 3 reports, I've paid attention to all of it, I've read all of it, I'm aware of it, and I told Mark multiple times, my goal was to go into this meeting that have you get into the weeds about random stuff, I mean, so this meeting, so.
I wanna comment on your path going to the northeast there. One, I was gonna ask for that before you said that, so I just wanna say thank you for that. And I understand that may be nothing for some time, because if there's nothing to connect to, there's no point in doing it, but I applaud you for including non-vehicular connectivity and
Well,
thinking
this
of
gets
that as the
going,
design.
there's a good chance that Barber Hall stuff is more likely to sell, and I would love for it to make sense in the word perpetuity, for it to parallel each other, but still for it to be its own thing, so. The road, in a perfect world, if things would have been different, done different when Zeke put that stuff through, I think it would have been much easier to do, but that's not the situation that we're in. But a bike and walking path is definitely something that is easy to do. You had a question, Mark?
Yeah, actually, a comment and a question. The question was, just for Kevin's purposes, Denise or Julie, where is it in the R1 zoning type code that, like the garage stuff? Where the it is in the R2, okay, that way Kevin knows where to look.
Look below the table in R2.
66.0312-R2, 70D.
Not to get into the weeds. But that's perfect, that way Kevin can get into that. The other thing I was gonna mention is it goes to your point about the trail. Because as part of our development, my presumption is that, like with the sewer and water utilities, that we would end up actually bringing it to the east property line. Under the presumption that somewhere along the line, you're gonna have something that develops that way, I don't know, but that would be guidance that we would probably work through with our civil engineering. And then working maybe with the village on, you know, if that gets served with utilities, which I'm assuming it has to, is that gonna be thought of in part of this extension, or
Right, that
does
was
that
the
come from Woodcrest?
conversations with
Yeah.
Julie and our utilities director, Megan.
I'd like to share one more idea, then I'm good, but on the road idea, I walk that property, Barbara's stuff, mine, I walk all of that stuff all the time. You got the hospital, and you have the Canterbury Road to the 2 Barb lots, and then up into her stuff. If you take a right and go south along the old fence line that separates Scanned and all that stuff and Barb's land, I've always thought that's where, in my mind, where a road would end up going. And that would run behind our, along the diagonal or just straight along, north-south on the property line of Barb Falls. The diagonal's not gonna work at this point, just because we're gonna do a cul-de-sac development, but I mean, are you familiar with what I'm talking about with? All right, so I mean there's a couple roads that already dead end out into that field, so to his point, the road, I was just going back to what Nate had asked. I've given it a lot of thought. It's gonna probably end up coming if you guys did it off the highway and then around the development, and then from there, you could either go that way or back towards Canterbury. And I always thought back towards Canterbury made the most sense, especially if you're gonna connect Canterbury out, which it sounds like that might happen at this point. So at least you do have Woodcrest to highway at some point. But it's a long stretch of road with a lot of, development maybe happening on one side or the other. So I never really knew how that would work without development happening on both sides.
Right. Anybody have anything else?
I just want to say what a great plan, and thanks for bringing this to Sister Bay. Giving a lot of working families hope of owning their own home someday and helping our workforce. Appreciate it. This is gonna be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrice.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. We didn't need a formal motion on.
No, it's just to give them
Okay.
ideas, direction. I think the direction was, it looks good. I've got to work on the building plan, really.
Well, I mean, are we good to go then with the private road, limited access road?
I mean,
That's what
Yeah.
I didn't hear any
I
objection
mean,
to
you
that.
have no issue.
No,
So it's stated for the record.
Yeah.
I'll get that in the minutes.
Is there general consensus that
Yeah,
we're good with
yes,
that? Limited
yes.
access
Voting
road?
for, so it's.
Is the motion needed, or are we?
Build your road.
No, we don't need it, but we will make sure that that is in the minutes.
Okay,
It'll say there's consensus on a limited access road and private roads throughout the development.
thank you.
Thanks.
Item 5D, draft request for proposals, housing development in Park, Northwoods Drive and Ava Hope Court.
Okay, so I gave you a first blush of an RFP on this. Do have some changes after our meeting today. But basically what happened is the housing committee has tasked with helping advance affordable housing in the village. And one of their recommendations was, instead of just sitting on that property we own at Ava Hope and Northwoods, that we should actually do a request for proposals or solicit for bids for people to develop that with affordable housing, whether it be multifamily rentals or townhomes that you could own or rent, or a mixture of that. And so, in fall, the housing committee had done a housing plan and then written a grant, and Patrice is the chair of that committee, so she could chime in if there's anything I missed, but the thought at that time was, wouldn't it be nice if you could develop that property and have the developer actually build and own the park? So, for a while there, we've talked about a park in that area. Somebody's actually given us money for a park in that area. If you separate land off for a community park, it really cuts down the amount of land that's available to do a multifamily development. So if you leave that land as part of the development, they can put more units up there, and it makes it worth a developer's while to actually go out there and build these buildings. So that is how the RFP was structured. And that's, you've seen that, in the draft that went for you. Now, when this first went to, so in January, the housing committee said, yeah, let's recommend an RFP for this. It went to the planning commission said, we like this idea. It went to Parks because it's Parks property, they're Parks property and streets. They said, some of the comments were, market rate housing is too expensive. Come up with maybe we should be more specific. So the draft that was in the packet was, had proposed it more specific language about the rent that could be charged. Well, it went back to housing committee today, and the housing committee said, no, I think we need to be more specific and have more specifics added. I just want to go through what the recommendations were from the housing committee today. So first of all, they recommended that the proposer be given actually 2 months to respond to this, because they are going to have to come up with building plans, schematics, in order, not full-blown building plans, but they're going to have to figure out how many units would be out there, where they would be located. There's a lot of work involved with it. They actually if they're going for WIDA tax credits, they would have to be working with the state. If they're just going with the workforce, housing corporation out of NeighborWorks, that would take some time too, so they said, you know, give them 2 months to actually go through and apply for this. So if we are okay with this, earliest we could get it out would be tomorrow with a proposal June 23rd. You're gonna see my changes in red and some comments in yellow. Some of it's very minor, but I'll bring your attention to the bottom of page 2. And they felt that, we should ask that at least 20% of the units be rented to households with incomes not exceeding 80% of the county median income. So basically saying, and because that's the threshold that the Workforce Housing Corporation does, they'll give money to a developer if they agree that at least 20% of the units be at that threshold. And they realize that a lot of developers would probably take advantage of that program, so their recommendation is use the same metric there, so it's consistent. They did say.
Do we know what the CMI is?
Not at this moment, I think.
Okay.
Things. But then they had that. They said, you know, they require 20%, but you may require more. You may want 50% of your units to be at that 80%. And then maybe the remaining not have a restriction. We had talked about how there are people that fall through the cracks. You know, you have programs that use WIDA tax credits. A lot of people that need help cannot get into those. When you have housing that is limited by, when you're limiting it by a CMI, you get people that are not eligible. So the thought was, don't restrict don't have the developer restrict all the units, leave some of them out there for those people that are falling between the cracks. But they recommended they be restricted using the same standard that the Housing Corporation does. But again, they said, but you may consider more, so, that would be their first recommendation. I think we should talk about is if we want to be consistent with what the Workforce Housing Corporation does and what the Housing Committee recommended.
So why is the one CMI and the second one AMI?
Because it's, because they look, I guess it's 80% of the county median income adjusted for household size. But in no case can that exceed 120% of the area median income. So they're looking at 2 different factors. One is you're adjusting it based on the number, the household size, and the other one, you're just taking that general flat area median income and saying, but hold on, in no case can you go over 120. That keeps it affordable for a lower income family. And I think if I remember right, Patrice, do you remember I think they said a family, that would allow a family making $14 an hour, I think they said eligible.
See, I really need to know what the CMI and the AMI are before I can sign off on this. Because in this same paragraph, was one of my biggest concerns, which is on the top of page 3, the last sentence that's still in. Certainly if tax incentives are utilized, rents may be lower. And as happy as we are that the Marissa Downs and the Shoals project came to Sister Bay, it excluded so many people. And I want to make sure that the CMI and AMI and that 80% and 120% will address those people, because I think the Shoals at the time, I don't know if anything's changed since the beginning. I think that there was an income cap of about 51,000 to get in there.
Denise, the median income for the county is 71,785.
71,785.
Just on a quick Google search.
It's lower for Sister Bay, it's 57,000 per household.
Just a quick Google search shows that for the county.
So.
In here though, Louise, it does talk about county median income, that's why we just. The county, that's why I use the county references of 71,785.
So then 80% is 57,000.
Right? And then their income cannot exceed 30% of that. Or I'm sorry, their rent.
And what's the AMI?
You said it was 57, Sister Bay.
I don't know if area means Sister Bay
Yeah.
proper or,
Sister bit, the difference between CMI and AMI is splitting hairs essentially, but.
oh, really? Okay.
Well, I mean, you know, area median income is the midpoint for a region's income, right? And then, CMI is 50% or above and 50% or below. They're averaging in one, and otherwise they're taking literally half above and half below. That's,
So we're saying, for the CMI, we're saying 1435 a month would be 30% of 80% on a monthly basis. You're saying they could spend 30% of the on housing.
Of their rent, right?
Yeah, 30%.
Okay, so the 120% AMI and 57,000 means that you could still be making 68,400, which you have, we have a lot of people that live together as, not just as couples, but also just as roommates, two girlfriends, two guys, whatever, trying to make ends meet. And so you put in two people's income, they won't qualify.
But this is saying only 20% of the units have to be satisfied that requirement.
Okay,
And that's the question.
thank you. I got lost in the weeds.
So,
Yeah,
but
and if we were to increase that to a higher percent, it would be more, would be reserved for.
Right, and that's why I have that question mark there is, is that 20% the way it's written, but do we want to increase that to maybe 50% of the units have to be reserved for that? To eliminate people from having, maybe that can have or can afford much higher rents.
You still have the people that put the rent in their name and then take in a roommate to share the cost anyway. You're not gonna be able to police that. But it is.
Well, if there's tax incentives involved, if they went that route, that would be pretty strict. That
Right.
you can't have extra people living in what you're renting.
Right, if they did the tax incentive route, like with WIDA, they're gonna say you have to have X% at this amount, X% at this amount, X% at this amount. It ends up being like the Shoals, whereas you said, like you said, Denise, some people get excluded that way. And then they have very strict rules on those as well.
Does the Shoals have anything reserved for people that aren't restricted to a specific income?
No,
They
no,
don't,
because they're
okay.
getting the WIDA tax credits.
The entire complexes?
Yep.
No, some people I think are paying market.
Well, that's what I heard.
Yeah.
That's why I'm
This is based on
asking.
their
Yeah.
income.
Yeah, some people are,
Okay,
Because they're
so,
making more money.
and do we know if it's completely full?
It is full.
yes.
It is, okay.
Yeah.
No, what we talked about today was that due to the number of units you can have on here, you're probably not gonna get somebody taking advantage of using the WIDA tax credits. Because they're gonna want many more units to make that work. So you're realistically probably gonna get somebody who's gonna be working with the workforce housing corporation. Which gives you like $500,000 towards the infrastructure or needs like that. In exchange, you're capping it, and their cap is that 20% have to be, cannot exceed 80%. But like I said, we can increase that if we think we want more of the units to be capped, we can put that in here. or if we just wanna leave it the way it's written, we can do that as well. It's totally up to us. There's no requirement, there's no limit on
I
it.
know, but I want to make sure that we get proposals.
Yeah, if we
Right,
put it too high.
Right,
it's
you
gonna
put it at
probably price
50%.
it out.
Yeah, I'm afraid that somebody would go, I just
Not worth
can't,
my time.
yeah,
they still have to make money.
right.
Right.
Yeah, money always is the problem, isn't it?
Right. So keep it at 20, the way it's written in the redraft?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna just keep making these. So then, as you go on.
Well, let's just say we get 10 responses and we don't like any of them. Just because we put this out there doesn't mean we're committing to doing this at this point. I
Right.
just want to say that,
Yeah, and that's spelled out at the end that it doesn't commit us to
So,
going with anything.
the,
And we could also negotiate, if there was something that we liked, but
Yeah.
wasn't quite right, maybe we could negotiate with that one particular person.
yeah, tax incentives can be helpful, but they can also be a huge hindrance.
Yes.
It's really important that we understand that, because that to me could be more problematic to get it depending on the hooks that they have.
Yes.
Julie, how many units are we thinking about for this?
So we're gonna get to that in just a second here.
Okay.
Automatically, they're allowed 12. But we need to talk about increasing that. So, but before we get that, I just want to add another change at the top of page 3. Where it talks about if they opt to do units that are sold for home ownership. You know, we would need to make provision for like 0 lot lines and smaller lots. That's something we'd have to consider with this project, if that's what they propose. But the committee today had talked about. Don't tell them what type of model, you know, because originally it said, you know, you had the mortgage couldn't exceed a certain amount or whatever. They said, no, we should leave it up to the builder to propose an ownership model and pricing structure. Because he has to make sure it pans out for him. And we really don't think anybody's gonna do that anyway, but at least, if they do want to sell them. It would be, let them propose it to us and we look at it at that time to see how it's structured. So you'll see that change in there. Now, to your question, Patrice, what we talked about was. So R2 would allow 6 units per acre. You got just a little over 2 acres. So you can have 12. Now the planning commission has the authority to increase the density on that. And the original draft, as you know, it didn't have a number. It said it's 6, you know, sometimes they can go as high. A typical increase is 35%, but it doesn't tell them how many units they could have. And the housing committee said, you know what, you really need to define that because they need to do a pro forma. They need to know how many units they actually are gonna be allowed on that property. So they're saying we should be specific and talk about what that density. I'll use the term waiver or increase is before we even put the RFP out.
Why
When
wouldn't
did we do 35%?
No, I was looking at the land, the cluster subdivision. With that, the max we would ever increase would be 35%.
why wouldn't we leave it at our regular 6 units per acre to see what kind of response we get?
You
can always
could,
go,
well, you
you
could.
can add more, but you can't back out.
You could, but you're also, you may be eliminating a lot of people. I mean, they have to make the numbers work for them, or they're not gonna. We could just leave it at 12. If that's what we want.
I think we can make a greater impact too. I mean, like that would be the other argument is one, make it flow, but also to actually get 20 units or 50 units. I mean, at some point, yeah, we're not gonna do 1,000 units on there or even 100 units, but where are we comfortable? Because we could make more of an impact for more people and get better offers.
Yeah, so 12 is what we're allowed. And whatever the density increases is totally up to us. And if that's 0, it's 0.
Well. 33% would be 4 more units, that's 16.
That's not that many.
But that's
units
not
on
that many.
property.
No.
And I think it's. it's all about placement, it's all about design. You know, if there was a bad design, 12 could look worse than 16.
Yeah.
Um,
And you get to pick the design and the architectural, I mean, that has to come to you where you're saying, don't like the design, don't like the roof pitch.
I think that the purpose, this is the village land, we're trying to help people with affordable housing. We need to provide more than 12. We need to maximize that the land that we are gonna give this developer.
I would be willing to go so far as to say up to 18.
Up to 18 units.
Don't write it down.
No, I'm just talking
I'd
about.
I'd like to see it go to 20 personally.
I could see 18 or 20, yeah.
And I also think that one of the things that I don't like about the Shoals, and it was because of WIDA that they had to do it, was I do think that we should be looking for multi-story here, because otherwise we're adding sprawl on there. I mean,
Mhm.
it, 2 stories it's gonna have a bigger footprint, but at least physically, but I'm sorry, it'll have a bigger presence, but it'll have a smaller footprint if we do that, sorry.
Well, and also you have Stony Ridge right across the road, and that's all 2-story.
Mhm.
There's a lot of people that wanted to live at the Shoals, but they can't afford it. Right. So we need to fill that hole.
20 is okay, up to 20, and see how it lays out, and if we hate it, say, mm,
Yeah.
How many units are in those Taylor apartments over there?
I don't know, my name is J.J. Taylor.
And those are 2-story, right?
mhm.
So are you talking about an apartment complex or townhomes? So,
It's up to them what they propose to us, and then we'll decide which one we go with, you
and
know?
if we don't mess with WIDA and all that junk, which is all up in the air anyway, because that might not exist in months to come. Can we do a 2-story without an elevator?
Yes,
Yes.
and you can.
Yeah, you
I
can.
mean, there's apartment buildings without elevators.
Niagara and the rest of them did that.
I think, don't quote me on this, but I think the exit has to be within like 70 steps of their door or
Okay.
something to not have an elevator. That rings a bell to me. I don't know if that's.
I mean, you could do like 2 townhomes, almost like a condo with maybe 2 stories, but. You know, maximize it as long as, like you said, 2 stories makes more sense because. The footprint is smaller, so you can either get more out there, which is really the goal, right? And I think this is a great place to do it because of the Shoals, because of the Taylor Apartments and the condos. It all kinds of, it's different levels of which one you want to live in and which one you can afford.
But there's a lot of multifamily there, there's housing partnership lots there. You've got single story, you've got the 2-story, you've got the apartment style, you've got the condo style. It'll be interesting to see what they come back with, because it could be a really good blend for that area. Are we okay with consensus on up to 20?
I think so.
I'm good with that.
And who knows, if somebody draws it out and we go, oh, they can fit 22 on that or something.
I mean, if you would have just said 51 units on that property, that would have seemed a lot, but when you look at it, how it's laid out,
Right.
it's not that dense. So it's
Right,
all
think
their
about 9
implementation.
more units there and,
I
you know,
think
that they could have.
when that all comes to fruition, you drive that neighborhood, it's gonna feel very dense. Even at 51.
You know, if they did the cluster subdivision design, they could have like 90,
Oh, no, I
90
mean,
lots, which
the
was,
zoning allowed or the
yeah.
codes allowed, I'm just saying, when you look at that and, you know, you drive around that adjacent. Development right to the north of it. Which is nowhere near as dense, but it is relatively crowded.
Julie, did you have a number in your head when you looked at that for units? I'm just curious.
On this,
Yeah. Wanting
Um,
more than 12. I mean, do you think 20 was close to where you were thinking or?
I didn't have a number in mind because I envision, the park out there. I envision different things. I envision like a townhouse setup, an apartment setup. I was hoping it'd kind of be a blend of things on that property is what I
Okay.
thought would be a creative way to use that property. You'll see later on in here, one of the ideas I presented, possibly building into, the hill along Northwoods.
Yeah.
Because the topo drops off, there's a 10-foot difference, so that's perfect to get, if you come in off Avon, you drive into a garage that's built into a hill. And then you have your 2 stories on top of it from Northwoods, it looks like you have a 2-story building. But from the back, you have 3-story because you have that exposed level, which nobody really sees.
Well, the
From
other
public
apartment
street.
building
Right,
will.
we want, and
They
we,
might not like that view.
and they would have to vegetate it and, plant trees, but we know it takes a while to grow up. But I just think there's a lot of creative things you can do on that property if you're using all the lots together. Okay, so then you'll see at the bottom of page 3, multifamily housing cannot exceed 35 feet in height, setbacks are a minimum of 60, we go through the setbacks. One question I have on there is, the zoning code dictates the size of the unit, but when I look at other apartment plans, it doesn't look like the village has implemented those unit sizes when it comes to multifamily housing. That's what I thought, we kind of waived that, we look
So
at.
I guess we only ever talked about it as single family homes.
Right, so the code doesn't specify that, it says all units, 1 bedroom is 900, 2 bedroom, off the top of my head, 1100. But yet we have apartment buildings that are not that big. So I did not include that in here because I don't think we've been applying that to multifamily.
Should we?
And I just wanna make sure I think eventually we clean that up in the code, but I just wanna make sure I was on the right track with that, so I did not include a size in here.
So what do you remember a 2-bedroom is? That 1100?
Is it 1100?
I think it's 1100. So, because I just had written down at the Glen J. Taylor Niagara Ridge, what their square footage was for, their units. And then the rent that, they are getting, and Niagara is over 1100. J. Taylor is definitely under, and only some at the Glen are over 1100, but 1067 was their smallest unit, so it's really pretty close. So I don't think that there's anything glaring, maybe except J. Taylor, which are the smallest ones, 980 to 1039 square feet.
So do not include any size limits in here and see what they propose. Okay.
I mean, if they're in the business of building, renting, selling, I mean, there's a point where it's too small, it's just a bad design. People won't,
They don't wanna live there.
they don't want to live there.
900 square feet is actually a pretty good size though. I mean, if it's a one,
If it's a 1-bedroom,
I really don't think we should have any minimum square footage on this, but I don't think that of anything, I don't think we should have minimum
Right.
square footage on
I don't
anywhere,
think
so on
we-
this one, definitely not.
No, we shouldn't have.
okay, so then I won't put that in here, but if they call, I will explain, no, for this project, there is something. All right, so we just go through
and
the,
so how will we get? Never mind, go ahead.
so then we go through just the requirements, wall can't exceed 50 feet, stuff below the garage. But I do have a question you'll see highlighted in yellow on page 4. I say, do we want to limit it to 2-story? Do we want to limit it to 2-story above a garage, 2-story as viewed from a street, 3-story? We have a 35-foot height limit. Do we want to say anything about that? The housing committee thought we should be very clear on what is allowed there, because they said people may want 2-story, and of course, that makes a more affordable development if you go up instead of out.
Yeah, I would not be in favor of a 3-story in that area.
So just say 2-story or 2-story above a garage?
No, that's 3-story.
Yeah.
I think 2-story and then 35 feet, if they, depending on how the topology works, that may, like you're saying, if it's going into the hill. Maybe that's not so much.
Picture yourself driving into Sister Bay.
Mhm.
Right now, as you come in on 57, it is very commercial feeling.
Right.
Between the medical center, those condos there, and then all the apartments and everything else. all of a sudden you throw up a small lot with 3 stories in there. plus
That's
roof,
already high.
It's gonna stick up way above
Yeah.
everything else. It's gonna look really bad.
Okay, it's gonna really take off all those people that live over
So
there.
say 2-story only, correct?
2-story and
Right,
35.
2-story.
I mean, it's our regular,
Okay,
wouldn't change that.
great. Um. And then, let me see what other. I did add that the housing committee would review all proposals for rent structuring to ensure affordability requirements are met, because that's their area of expertise, not ours. And those were the changes. Denise, I think you told me you found some more typos, so hopefully you can get those to me or.
I'm going to just take pictures of the pages in my packet and should I send them to Heidi or you?
Just to me, because I'm changing this.
Okay.
Okay, so with those changes, I will send this out to the list of developers that we have and to and on the state website. We'll see what kind of response we get.
So over between things, as I've read through stuff, I've seen a lot of things referring to affordable housing. I find no definition.
Yeah,
Is that something that,
It's basically workforce housing.
and there's no
Affordable
definition of
housing.
workforce.
there isn't
Yeah.
a workforce definition?
No, there's no, you're not gonna find a
No,
definition.
and that's, I mean, to give everybody in all the different communities an option to talk on the same page is the same issue working for.
So this has been a big conversation in the state for a while, and it really is what each community defines as affordable, whereas their workforce housing,
And we have that option to do that.
we do. I mean, we could ask the housing committee to come up with a definition for us.
Does the county have any idea of what they consider affordable housing?
No, because you know, it depends on
Carlsville is different than.
Well, that's-
each community, but it also depends on the number of bedrooms, the number in your family. If you go on HUD's website, you'll see what they define as affordable. And it's all based on, are they paying the rent or I'm sorry, are they paying the utilities, what size is the home, what size is, what's their income? So there's a lot of detail that
There's a lot of things would have to.
there's a lot of things that go into it, and HUD has that model, and they have, I shouldn't say it's a model, but they have the data broken down based on how many bedrooms, family income, rent. I can send you a link to it if you ever wanna just take a look at it, but it's not, you can't just say, oh, it's X amount of dollars, you know, per household, it just doesn't work that way. So,
Well, yes, it's based on what a household can afford to pay as a percent of their income, but it's also gonna be what the area bears too. Those are elements.
yeah, and
Sorry, I'm just a new guy asking questions.
I think those are really good
Somebody
questions, they're good questions, and they're not, and we haven't talked about that here. But the housing committee has touched on that and other
I just
groups
don't
I've
know
been
that
in.
we wanna put it in a box, what that is. That's
And it's
my
constantly
perspective.
changing.
I think would be helpful.
Oh,
Yeah,
because
to
it
have-
would change every year too.
well, it would, but you've got the formula created, so the inputs would change and the number would.
But our formula doesn't. I mean, we would have our formula, I think it's a feel-good formula. But WEDA's gonna have theirs, you know, HUD's gonna have theirs, these different programs that help fund it, they're all gonna have their own. And actually, they're all using the same formula, they're working off that HUD formula, many of them. So it wouldn't match ours, but. I could put those numbers together for you, just so you, for the commission, just so they see what that is, what that looks like. Or send the link to,
I did get the link.
yeah,
Look
I'll
at it.
send that over to you.
We're ready to move on.
Yes.
5E, draft text amendment and rezone petition R4 zoning former Wilsey property and former Lauderquist farm.
Okay, so this was a recommendation from the housing committee, it went to the plan commission. In March, and we decided to look at it and send it to a public hearing, so. What I've done, or I think we have, so what I've done is I've put it in what it would actually look like, and if we're okay with this, it would go into an ordinance format. And then be scheduled for public hearing. That's just the first one on the R4 standards.
So
Yeah.
question under principal structure, front yard on public street. So 10 feet from furthest extension to right of way. I don't know what that means. I've been here a long time.
So
So if I don't understand what those words mean, somebody else will.
we can make that out further. It was, what we had talked about was furthest extension of a building such as the porch. So the porch would have to be, that would
Okay,
be
we
the-
just then need to write from the building. 10 feet from the furthest extension
Of the building.
Of the structure. Would be the better word.
And I'm gonna put in parentheses if you're okay with it. For example, a deck.
Sure. Or a porch. Do we, do we want R4 to be on a private street?
You mean limited to private or?
Well, because it
including-
says principal structure, the setback being 20 feet from the edge of the easement, it's the last square, page 63. And it's something that we just hadn't talked about, and then once it was there in black and white, I'm like, is that a good idea? Is that a bad idea? Is it benign? I don't know.
So when I saw that, I raised the question of, does this mean that your garage can be so close to the street that you can't actually park a full-size vehicle in the driveway without sticking out into the street? 25 feet is really where that becomes your minimum to still get past it.
Well, 20, we would require a parking stall is 20 feet deep here.
I'm saying somebody with a pickup truck, my truck wouldn't fit there.
Yeah, there's a lot of pickup trucks that don't fit in our parking
Yeah, you
spaces
can-
in the village.
Yeah, the village spots, you hang over both white lines.
But that's a choice that people are making to buy a pickup truck. I mean, like, just because somebody chooses to have a larger vehicle doesn't mean we should supersize everything around that. I mean, because that's what's happened in the last, 30 years. And-
My concern though is that if you do have that vehicle, you now have it parked and there's no way for people to pass by it. I mean, it's a matter of just 5 feet of the setback.
Well, let's think about this. Let's go back to the first question, which is, do we want them on private roads or easements? Well, that's a good question. And I'm trying to think, there's other easements you might want to make sure that are protected. You have, actually, and I think what we mean there is a road easement. We don't say it, but I think that's what we mean.
Skip a Ford F-150 2025 is between 209 and 243 inches. So only the longest ones are over 20 feet.
As soon as you get a 4-door pickup, you're over 20.
Okay, so we're modeling that around the largest of the pickup trucks.
I'm just
The
trying.
point I'm
worst-
making, I get what
worst
you're
case
saying, Skip.
scenario. Or, somebody that has a Suburban, something like that, it's gonna be.
But then anybody that doesn't have that is having to pay for that extra. So they have that, so you're forcing that on everybody because somebody might have an outlier. Just,
It's not a mountain I'm gonna die on, I just wanted to bring it up and.
it's a fair point.
There'll be plenty of mountains to die on. I just warned you.
So Denise, to answer your question, I think if you allow it on a private street, you're helping keep it affordable. However, I don't know if that would
But who is,
that create like a
now you need an
overcrowded?
association. Who's plowing it if it's private?
Yeah, I mean,
R4 is denser. I mean, and look what, Skip thinks that, Nick's project, even though he's doing less than what the code allows him to do, once it's built, thinks that it will feel very dense. This is even, R4 is even more dense. So who's taking care of the road? Who's
Yeah,
plowing it? Who's cleaning it? If it's not,
I think that's a really good point, because the private road could make it more affordable upfront, but long-term, it could be more affordable because you're gonna have HOA uncontrolled prices on that, so maybe you only require it, maybe you only allow them on public roads.
What would happen if we, let's just say Nick came back and said, you know what, this project would really make more sense if this was on R4. If it's meeting the requirements, I mean, like, so for me, the R4 requirement that we've got kind of out there is, do you have a deed restriction on it? And that's kind of what is, seems to me to be the prerequisite at this point, because we'll have that.
Right.
Up there. Would we want somebody like Nick to have that in the development? Would we want that style to have the option to do R4? I could see sometimes where we would, I don't know that we should outright ban it from being there. But there'd have to be some pretty specific circumstances to want to use R4 there.
Well, and you know,
how about
thinking out loud,
see, because he's still gonna own. He said he was still gonna own the land, right?
that land to the south, correct?
No, no, they are
no,
selling the
They're
lot.
selling.
Oh, that's right. I did write that. in
It's
my
like a
notes.
condo
Excuse me.
association.
Yeah, it was 60 to 70,000 per lot.
Yeah. How about we make it a conditional use?
Well, or look at it this way, so these standards are, there's a lot out there already. And you wanna build a house, and these are the requirements for your house, right? So. The creation of the development itself would go through different processes, which is when we're gonna be able to say, no private road in this case, public road in this case. Cause this chart is just for, I wanna build a house on an existing lot that's already approved in a subdivision somewhere. Cause this is zoning, this isn't land use. The land use chapter. So if the land use chapter allows it on a private road, if we would allow something on a private road, yeah, you gotta think about that. But that wouldn't be this chart.
It's the land use chart.
Yeah, if you allow a subdivision, if somebody wants to do an R4 subdivision, that is processed through the land division code, not this chart. Now, once it's in place, once the plat is recorded, somebody buys the lot,
Then it falls under.
then it's gonna fall under here. So I think that's a good question, but I don't,
You think it's okay?
yeah, now that I think about it, I think
Okay.
that's a different process that
Okay.
we would worry about that.
Do we have to put it in somewhere in here, so in 10 years, when everybody's changed, they're not gonna go. "Oh,
I'm gonna die in this chair, or
yeah, you might lately.
I'll make sure the minutes say something.
Okay.
yeah, but no one's gonna look back on the minutes. So then, on the top of page 64, we have side yard from wall. 8 feet one side, 16 feet total. Isn't that 8 feet on each side?
It is, but you know what, I agree, in our code, we routinely in every chart say one side and total, we're always like 10 foot on
Okay, so
one
you're
side.
just following the.
I'm just
okay.
trying to be consistent,
Cause that's kind
So
of
does this mean
ridiculous.
8 feet from your house and 8 feet from the guy next door?
16-foot separation.
could.
Okay, so you can run a driveway through the middle and put a garage at the back.
Yes, and that's exactly why
That's-
we
okay,
did
yeah.
that. And you'll notice this one says side yard is from wall. Because we just changed it that we're gonna start measuring from overhangs, right, from eaves and for the 6 inches of building elsewhere.
Right,
But in the R4, there's just not room to do it, so it would be measured from the wall.
Okay.
Keep it closer together.
so then. The box under that accessory structures, it says 5 feet. 3 is crossed out and then there's 2. Shouldn't 5 feet go away?
I figured it out. No, those are referring to the sub numbers below. And because number 2 was crossed out,
Oh.
3 becomes 2.
Oh, see, and then I wrote, what's 1 and 3? I can't find any notations.
But you will see where I eliminated number 2 because it's just physically impossible in an R4 district.
Yeah.
Okay, but then if 3 is crossed out and 2 is there next to the 5 feet, but we've crossed out 2.
Well, we crossed off number 2 in the little box. So what was number 3 now becomes number 2.
Okay, so it's just, well, so then it has to be renumbered,
Right.
Yeah, that's what that's doing.
okay.
Well, if we're okay with that,
Yeah.
then that one would go to public hearing. And I think at the same time, you should look at rezoning Wiltie, and I've explained that here. That we need to assign a permanent zoning classification to that one and Lagerquist. So, I have what the plan has recommended. And so on the former Wiltie site, do we support rezoning the yellow area residential? And, which would be R4 in this case. And the light green, which is that area that cannot readily be serviced by sewer and water. The open lands or countryside or park and rec? What do you want to do with that?
Park, rec,
Park
is
and
my
rec.
opinion.
I have to tell you that with the work being done in the village, administration building and everything else, I think we're premature starting to lock up zoning on some of these pieces, not knowing how things are gonna lay out.
They have, the admin ad hoc building
Yeah,
have eliminated everything on the Wilsey. It's not in the running anymore.
But let's go back to what the code says. The code says you were already supposed to do this. So we're out of compliance with our code. That's why, even if we're not ready to do it, Skip, we still need to get in compliance with our code.
okay, yeah, I mean, it just means that we may have to end up having another hearing to change something.
So-
We may.
Let's just,
Rezone it something else.
let's just say that the 2 months from now, we decide we want to make it something else. What does that process look like? We go back to public hearing and we
Right.
rezone it again?
Right.
We have to amend our comprehensive plan?
Well, as long as, so if we made the yellow residential and the green park and rec, that is compliant with our comp plan. So we're good with that. Now, if you wanted to come back a couple months later and change this. Again, you go through the rezoning process, and if that rezoning does not match what's in the comp plan, then you have to change the comp plan too. Keep in mind, the comp plan is just saying it's open lands, and we don't have a zoning designation for that. That's why I said, what do you wanna call that? Countryside, park and rec, what label do you wanna put on there? So if we go with residential on the yellow, park and rec on the light green. And propose that rezoning.
Well, what about, can we put it as park and rec, because that's the property that has the arsenic?
Well, it's the entrance. The
Yeah.
yellow part, which I wanted to bring up. You know, all of our ducks are kind of. In a row, or things are falling into place, the comp plan and different things. And I think, and this is not necessarily a plan commission thing, but maybe it is. I think that we should hire someone to tell us what cleanup would be at that entrance.
So that's in the works. So that is part of that Bay Lake grant where they have that. So the Bay Lake used their EPA grant to first of all go through and do phase 1. They tested everything. Phase 2 is, okay, where is the really bad part and what do we have to do? So Bay Lake is working on a plan right now on what does that look like? You know, what does that land remediation look like? And my understanding, what it looks like is you scrape that, you move it off to the side and you cap it, so it's like a berm. And then that's like,
Is this on the Wilsey property?
yeah, on this part of the Wiltsey site,
Okay.
which is that bottom leg.
At the bottom.
Because I think when we were told that we couldn't even build a road on top of it, you know, I thought at least we could do that, because I think that entrance is a key component of this whole parcel, because if we can't have that access, and we would have to have everybody come up a Scandia, that's a nightmare.
That is, and so Skylar, Skylar and Bay Lake are, you know, that's their project. They're kind of figuring out what needs to be done and then they'll bring that back to us. But yeah, I mean, that's where the arsenic is so bad, you can't just,
Okay, that's what I was gonna ask,
Put a-
what contamination is.
there's contamination on the whole site. But it's, that point is the one that is not safe, that you have to do something. And there's different things you can do. You can dig all of that out, you can bring in new fill, or you can scrape it, cap it, you know, move the dirt off site. You can put a road in there, but the road still requires, right, you still have to grade for a road and you have to dig to put the sewer and water in there. So what he's looking at doing, what Stantec is looking at doing is designing, okay, if we dig for the sewer lateral here, road here, we're gonna disturb X amount of cubic feet of soil, we're gonna put that soil over here, and we're gonna cap it with fresh soil and plant vegetation. Okay, state of Wisconsin, will you accept that? Is that okay? And if it is, then we move forward with that idea. I mean, you don't really have a choice, you need to get into the property. It's not, I mean, you could use that for tennis courts out there, so part of that could actually be parkland, but the green part is where, so the green part isn't where we have the bad arsenic, but the green part cannot be serviced by sewer and water. So that's probably where we're gonna end up hauling those soils and capping them to make like a berm around the property. Maybe it becomes a little sledding hill, and then winter you
And
don't have to
does-
worry about it.
I haven't researched it. Does anybody know the answer? Does it eventually go away, or is it forever?
It's forever. That's what you
No,
have to.
It
think
won't
about.
be a matter of just capping, it'll be containing it. I was involved with some cleaning up in Chicago. Yeah. It has to be contained.
Well, with these, I know they had talked about scraping it off, hauling it to the green area, bringing in and capping it.
Then we cap, but they'll be doing something underneath it too, to make it impervious, so that it stays, so water doesn't leach through it.
Yeah,
Maybe
they
elsewhere.
didn't talk about that on this one, but maybe, I mean, we're not that far yet, so, but anyway, so that is in the works, and as soon as we have that, we'll know. We should have something this summer.
Because that certainly would give, hopefully somebody could give us an idea of what that cost is going to be, because that's probably one of the first things where money is, it's going to be big.
Yeah, you start
Like,
having,
what does that term mean to you, Skip?
millions, if
Sky,
you're hauling it offsite or having to,
yeah, Skylar did not think that. Skylar thought about 150.
really.
Yeah,
Well, it's not that whole bump out
Okay,
on the map.
well, and yes, it'd probably be, but it's all gonna be based on the cubic yardage of it and what they have to do and how far they haul it.
and what gets approved, you
Yeah.
know, what, maybe you
Yeah, I
have to
don't
do
know what-
something.
Wisconsin's gonna do on that.
So arsenic stays in the soil forever.
Yeah, well, during our lifetimes at least. I mean, it's been out there for over 100 years already, or about 100. Okay,
Did that bugs in the orchard then?
yeah, they have no bugs. So the rezone, okay, so are we okay with that moving forward then as residential and park and rec?
Yes.
Yes.
Do we need motions on these?
No, this is consensus. It's gonna have to go to public hearing and you're gonna have to make a
Okay.
decision. Then we get to Lagerquist and the comp plan that was just approved shows the left half of that property as purple, which is institutional government. And the east side of that green, which is park and rec. So that green could also be countryside.
No, I think Park and Rec from our discussions, at parks would make sense.
We have
We talked about you know, eventually moving the dog parks over there, having some urban gardens there.
These are things that have been talked about at parks, but haven't come out of parks yet, correct?
Well, we've drawn them on we put them on the map.
Okay, but I mean, there's not been a recommendation from parks at this point on any of that.
To who?
To the board or to anything that has not come out of parks. It's been discussions within the Parks Committee.
Right, would we have to have board approval?
Well, we had talked about, no, but we had talked about as part of our admin building project. You know, that impacts running the lateral to that community garden and we're kind of can't do much until you know what's happening with the rest of the property.
Right, and because we were gonna be planting some trees where we thought. Now this year, for eventually moving the dog park, having small and large out there. And so it would give, it time to grow in the future and to have shade and shelter.
And finance committee did approve money, be allocated for those trees. That happened, I think, in December.
That was
You approved that.
the Destination Door County grant money.
No, it was with the municipal reimbursement funds, which is.
Yeah, okay, good. I got those two confused.
Okay, so those will then go to public hearing.
And in the future, once we get to, refining. The Lagerquist property on whatever comes out of, the admin ad hoc or whatever. There may be property left over that we will either want to sell or. We can allow somebody to develop on it.
Yeah, we actually, I actually got a notice from a university, I was thinking it'd be nice to have landscape students actually go out there, design that community garden, design the dog park, where are these trees? Cause we have this money set aside for trees, we're supposed to be planting, but we don't know where to plant the trees. There is no design, but that is something we eventually. all
And
has
so
to
are
be
you gonna
tackled.
contact them and?
No, no, because, I know I don't wanna take on new projects, but the reality is I don't think we're there. You have a community garden, you don't have any water to it. You have to have water to it or know how you're getting that water.
I know, but that doesn't mean you can't have a design.
I just want to point out that we're gonna have the Lagerquist house in an I-1 on this. I mean, I think that's how we put it in the comprehensive plan. But there will be a house that's sitting in this I-1.
Right.
Oh, yeah, we probably should have made a L of the green
Yeah.
for that corner.
It's grandfathered. I think that if anything, it protects it from maybe becoming something else. It just keeps it grandfathered the way it
Okay.
is.
Just an observation
know.
on it. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think it's.
Yeah, if we ever change what's, I don't know what we'd ever do with that, but we'd have to revisit it. Okay. No guarantee when those are gonna get scheduled for public hearing, but I'm gonna try and get it done in time for next month.
All right, 5F, draft text amendments, chapter 66, dark sky lighting.
Nate, did you make any progress on that?
So I did do a little bit of digging and I've come up with a recommendation on here. So it is actually dark sky lighting week. Happens to be this week in particular. There is a Dark Sky International is the authority on this. I've got their model ordinance from their site. And I started going through piece by piece, looking at, okay, well, what do I like? What don't I like on there? And there's a whole lot that I don't like about this. I also started really thinking about this and I thought of sandwich boards. Now, for everybody else other than Denise, that doesn't mean much. I mean, Julie probably heard me say it enough times. It's unintended consequences on here. I wonder what this would actually, the implementation of this would look like in parts of the village. I also believe that the majority of the issues, the majority of the light pollution in the village is something that's under the village's purview right now because the main street lights are not, they're not dark sky compliant, at least in the color of their light. Those things have got to be around 5,500 K or 6,000 K. And dark sky is asking for some 3,000 or less. I think that we should try and correct what we can as a village. Before we start putting more ordinances out there, and we also have to look at the manpower issues. We're gonna have another set of ordinances for somebody to go out and enforce. And a lot of that enforcement is gonna be at night. I don't think this is the time to do it as much as I want to see us protect the dark sky. I think that we should do what we can as a village through our own lights. And then revisit this later.
And any projects that come.
Yeah, and I even thought about, well, could we put it in the code to say, because Dark Sky International does have an approval process for lighting fixtures. That might be worth incorporating to our code, at this point, but the whole dark sky ordinance seemed like it would, one, be another burden on staff, two, we should probably fix what we can first, because before we put this up on the rest of the village, we should try and clean our own house up. For what
I
we
mean,
can.
do we really think that there are individual homeowners that have obnoxious lighting?
Yes.
Yeah, we do get complaints, Adam.
So,
Oh,
Well,
I mean, we have
okay.
neighbors
Well-
that have string lights and it makes it look like a stinking used car parking lot.
And we have no restrictions on
I know.
street lights.
It's just lovely at 5 AM. Then they turn them off at 7 and then they turn them back on around 2:30 in the afternoon until they go to bed.
Yeah, the Airbnbs leave on all night.
Yes,
Yeah.
there's one off of Fieldcrest that has it strung all the way up to the house and it's set way back. And then from Highland, you can see it wrap around in the back. It just,
That's
it looks
nice.
ridiculous.
I will say this about the streetlights, so the Parks and Property and Streets Committee has discussed, WPS has offered to make the lights along highway, South and North Bay Shore Drive and 57 all dark sky compliant.
Are those purple lights?
so the purple lights are ones that actually, the filters on them have failed.
They're done.
Oh,
So then they
Okay.
end up looking like a black light, so those, they're gonna come back and replace all of those.
okay.
I
They're
actually,
not supposed to be purple.
they're not supposed
I
to be.
hate
purple.
those
If
things.
they're purple, you're supposed, WPS has asked that if you see a purple one to call them so they can get out there and replace.
Can we
it.
get some of our village lights that are not so bright?
I
I
think-
have one on South Island Road that just very obnoxious. Glares right into my house.
So I
I-
have a list of all the ones WPS has replaced already. And the ones that they're still gonna be working on. And then, like I said, Parks is looking at. Whether or not to authorize doing dark sky on the highway. So as far as the street lights, that's in the works, and that's not covered by our zoning code anyway. So. So what do we wanna do with that? I mean, we are doing them on a development agreement basis. I think it would be nice if we have. Standards that we could give people, I mean, cause it's.
But
kind
I
of
mean,
like-
we talk about it, it's in our code,
Is that good enough though? Because I have
it
heard,
mentions it. I don't think that there's any real big criteria, but by leaving it vague. As always. It gives the plan commission, the opportunity to
what I have seen
review
though,
what a proposal is.
sometimes we allow 3,000 K, sometimes there's one time we made it 2,700.
So that's one of them that I like, G, spectrum, unless otherwise specified in this ordinance, maximum allowable. Correlated color will be less than 3,000 K.
Yeah, that's low hanging fruit.
That's a simple one on there, that,
And we have told everybody that. I mean,
can we get it in our code somewhere though, that says the village wants external lights to say, there's gotta be a place we can put it in there without making a whole new set of code.
I mean, it already says 3,000, right? So if you make it say. Just get it black and white so people know when they're preparing their plans.
Then the other one that's gonna be big coming up here is, the sports light and sports lights, the one place where. The only one that was still on plan commission when this happened, so I get to take the blame for this is what happened up at Scanned.
yep,
We should not have permitted that. The plan commission authorized a plan that has light trespass. We made that mistake years ago, and I don't know that do we try and correct that? Because that also puts out a ton of light out there. Not only does it have light trespass for the neighbors, you see that outside of town quite a
you
ways.
see it way down Highway 57.
Mhm.
And I complained because it's in my backyard when
That's-
Zeke was here.
That's why I'm saying all this, Denise, because it's, yes, it's
I was
something that
not
the
on
village
plan
did,
commission at that time.
Well, and there's.
as I mentioned.
And you can, if you have a developed property and you wanna come back and you wanna put a light pole up there. I can't stop you, because there's nothing in the code, you know, you need a permit for a change of use, a structure, etc. There's nothing about lighting. And so, you know, I tell people, well, your light can't spill onto adjacent properties, your pole can't exceed 20 feet, you know. I give them the things that I'm aware are important to us, but there's nothing really in writing in the code to address a lot of what we want. So if we want it to be less than 3,000, or if we want it to be 2,700, I think the code say that.
Yeah, I mean,
You know,
Well, and Scand also has those concrete bases that they put the poles on top of.
mhm. There's, what happened is Plan Commission approved that plan. Scan came to the Plan Commission with that plan. We approved it. That was our mistake. And Scan did what they said they were going to do. So that is. I don't know what we do to correct that. I mean, do we go out there and say,
just
okay,
lost that one.
Oh, yeah,
Until
I
they
brought
looked
it
up.
up, because
Well-
it was just shining in my kitchen window in my backyard. Zeke said he went out there and the candle, what do they call it?
the candle flicks.
Something. He said it wasn't off the chart or whatever. I'm like, well, I didn't have it before, now I have it, and it's ugly. And then they also, when they blasted for their pond, ruined my house because Zeke did not.
I was just bringing
were
that up
supposed to
because it was
have
relevant to this conversation in there. So you've got that, then you also have the sports lighting out of the ice rink. And that is. That
That's
is
bad
probably
also.
not dark sky compliant. We have control over that one as well. I mean, does it pay for us to redo the lighting on that, something that's likely gonna get replaced anyway? No, but.
Do they leave it on all the time?
No,
No, but you can, I mean, like where I'm at, I can go look out my front window, even though I'm looking in a different direction, I can say, oh, the.
the rink's open.
Rink's open, yeah, you can tell.
We all have our light issues.
Well, I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but at the same point, looking at this as what is it we can do as a village? I mean, you have these streetlights we're dealing with. The other question I would have is, do we need all these streetlights?
No,
I mean, cause like, when Shirley Adams moved out of my neighborhood, I miss Shirley, but she was the one who really wanted that streetlight on there, and I asked my neighbors, like, do you really want the streetlight on Pheasant Court?
Are those WPF?
Yes,
Okay. So if they put a lower wattage in there, that should help.
so that's something when we're reviewing a new land division for a plat, we would look at that, we can control the lighting on that. For the zoning code, though, that we can't control through zone.
I mean, I think one of the things that we keep hearing lately also is how our roads aren't safe for people walking, whether it's children, dogs, whatever. And people walk all the time.
Yeah, that's
That's
another issue.
today,
You gotta
and you
it so
have to
see.
have streetlights for pedestrians because we don't have sidewalks that are safe.
there are some times where streetlights actually make it more challenging to walk if you're in a very low density area. So like if I'm walking, say, like in front of Rob's house, it is dark. And it's actually easier to see because if cars are coming down there and you're on a very low traffic road, you can see them further away. Now, do I like having that street light on Scandia there? Yeah, that's useful. But at some point, those very low traffic roads where you're having one car come down, you're not having cars pass, like on Scandia, you'll have two cars
Right.
pass. You need to see, okay, well, I'm gonna have to step out into the ditch and see where you're going. But Scandia would be a place where, one of those places where, yeah, those streetlights can be helpful. Some of the other places, they're not necessarily. And one other thing that I didn't like about this code was like, it's all about, okay, there's so many exceptions in it saying like, okay, well, if it's for security, then you can have this. Like, well, what good does that do then? Like, I can just say anything's for security. And also just talking about like, how you can't have lights that interfere with motorists. I'm like, if you go on Scandia at night, there is a light, and this is in Liberty Grove, so it's not something we can do anything about. you've got a light that shines on a sign. It makes it look like somebody's walking on there. When I come on there on my bike at night and I see that, it blinds you, so you can't see very much.
Well, then you should be calling Liberty Grove to ask them to address that, because, I mean, maybe they have something. Because we have that with any signs that are lit in the village. And if it gets out of whack or starts shining, you know,
Yeah.
something or whatever, that's against our code. It cannot impede drivers. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's been a while. I have completed Liberty Grove in the past and it's fallen on deaf ears. I could
Oh.
try and do it again.
Sorry.
So for, as far as moving this, project forward or dropping it, we don't wanna change, right now it says 3,000 K, we just wanna leave it at that?
I think 3,000 K makes sense. We could pull
Or
this up.
lower.
Yeah, I may be saying max or up to,
I think it does say,
because the encouragement of being below that is.
I think it does say.
Depending upon its application.
And we don't wanna do anything with string lights?
I'd love to get rid of string lights.
Yeah.
We did regulate them on Sarah
Businesses.
White's property.
We allow them at businesses.
And when you
But-
say,
But Sarah White's, we actually put a cap
On the voltage.
Yeah. we'll
I
have to
think was-
undo-
but you're talking commercial properties, not private
That
properties.
was-
This
Okay,
is,
when you say a light can't spill over onto somebody else's property. I can see my whole backyard lit up, so I think it's spilling.
Well, those are non-directional.
I know,
there's
and
There's-
they're light bulbs, of course, with,
there's a definition of light trespass that we've got somewhere in there. I don't know if it might just be under nuisance.
Yeah, I'd have to look at the code. There's a whole lighting section. So I'd have to see if it's in there.
How about,
I just, if we're gonna make changes, we'd better off doing them all in one big public
Yeah.
hearing. For that.
what if you have to have them turned off by a certain time?
That's the
and
other
you
thing
can't
it says
turn
is,
them on.
well, the thing that's written on some of one of the codes is you have to have your lights turned off at night. I'm like, okay, so why do we have lights if you can only have them on during the day? I understand the concept behind that, but to be perfectly honest, I've got string lights outside my house. I've also got them on a timer, so they turn off at 9 o'clock at night.
Well, and the guys off of Fieldcrest, those are on all the time.
Yeah,
And the one by me is, it's not that it's late at night, but it's so early in the morning and it's at the back of our house, so my whole bedroom lights up at like 5 AM. Cause the guy goes to bed at 9 and gets up at 5. And they stay on until, I don't know, 7 or 8
Well, then
o'clock,
maybe,
and then turn them off. And turn them back on at 2 in the afternoon.
I
It's
mean-
like, it's sunny out. It
well,
just-
maybe Carla needs to take a look at that.
But there's a lot of the short-term rentals that are doing the same thing. Down
We have no
Fieldcrest.
guidelines on it.
But if it's a nuisance, that's under the nuisance.
Oh,
code.
yeah, there's some guidance on it.
I would,
On string light?
No, it's on lighting in general, nuisance lighting.
Spotlights shining out your. The
Yeah,
back.
I know from enforcing the code, there's a lot of gray areas in there, like
Yeah,
if string lights, you view them as a nuisance. Your neighbor's not gonna think they're a nuisance.
No.
Clearly likes them during the day.
apparently
what-
so.
What are the parameters, you wanna have something definitive you can go on, so you don't get a lawsuit.
And they couldn't string them just around their deck. They had to hang them from the trees.
They're right on the lot line.
Yeah,
So, I mean, those are referred to as
okay,
festoon.
that would be something, if they're right on the lot line, that.
that's
they-
not my lot
Keep them
though.
tight to their home. Keep them tight to the home, because it's like the whole backyard of ours is on the border lit up.
Let's say, so what are our other setbacks? That would be a good one. You cannot hang string lights within the setback.
Lighting, right, let's not just, I mean, the only downside of that is you could also restrict Christmas lights, but one could argue that string light is a Christmas light if you don't. So that,
Seasonal is one thing, but every day, all day.
Well, patio lights outside, that's seasonal.
I know.
I mean, we're just splitting hairs, that's why I think we need
I know, we
something
need,
black.
we need to, this is a big issue. And I think we're gonna have to go over a lot of stuff.
And now I think we've moved from dark sky into nuisance conversation.
Yeah,
So
I think these things tend to be part of that.
Yeah.
That abuse the dark sky.
No, I would actually disagree with that. I mean, like, I'm not saying these aren't its own issue. But this isn't what's contributing to the light pollution that's really getting the village lit up. I mean, it's gonna be the street lights, the sports lights, the street lights downtown that we chose to put at about 6,000 K for whatever reason years ago.
No, we
There's so much
would require
crap here.
metal halide actually on,
Which is bad.
yeah, that's very bright.
And it's very, very,
I mean, this was probably done before LEDs were as effective as they
So
are.
that. and
I don't
the
even know
fact-
that anybody's using those,
No,
even though that it says that in there.
there's still a handful out there. I see those really blue lights.
What does it say?
Any outdoor lighting fixtures installed in a parking lot shall use metal halide lamps.
I mean, I have metal halide above my gas pumps, but they show directly down.
So I mean, the code does need revising.
That was all I was pointing out.
I mean, I can grab the stuff that I thought was reasonable in here and
I think you should need, just because I think it needs to be updated. You tend to know the most or understand the most about it. You know, the street light thing is something outside of the zoning. Something we could look at in land division, when you're laying out a subdivision, kind of lighting should we be looking at? And then, of course, parks, you know, deals with the streets, but from the zoning aspect,
Yeah, I think.
what needs to be changed?
And then just pull what you like out of there. We'll have conversation. What the other issues that we've talked about tonight that maybe it's can't hang string lights, you know, in the setback area.
Yeah.
Things of that nature, whatever else we talked about, and put it in a bullet point list and we can come up with.
but this is also, now we're stepping beyond just the dark sky issue. I mean, like, just to be clear, we're also talking about the issues we're having with it impacting neighbors.
Yeah, I think it's the nuisance, updating the lighting section and the night sky.
All encompassing.
Well, we never have enough to cover on this meeting, so it'll give us something to do in the future.
Yeah. Okay,
All right. 3 permits given out. Anybody have any questions about
yeah, it
those?
was supposed to be a quarterly one. I see the only one in here is for January, so,
Okay.
or one.
All right, items to be placed on future agenda, obviously. Lighting, nuisance.
I have one thing here too. So we do have a code which talks about the process, and we just amended our code to update the process on getting your fire number, you know, your street number, your
Yeah.
number assignment. And we got an email today from the county that the fee, that the county is now requiring fees to request addresses from the county. So we're gonna have to, they're gonna require $25, so we're gonna have to look at the process that we have in place and the fees
Fee
and,
schedule.
yeah, but we just got this today at 2:30, so we're gonna have to look at updating all of that again.
Is
More
that
to
a
come.
planning commission thing or is that a board thing? Is that a fee schedule?
The number assignment, the thing is in plan
Okay.
commission, and then the fee schedule would be the board.
Next meeting, May 27th, 5:30. There a motion to adjourn? Motion by Heidler, second by her, all in favor?
Hi.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for your patience.
Nice first meeting, Skip.
Yeah.
No, yeah, that's good or bad.
You were very, very, very prepared.
Man.
Yes, he's awesome.
What?
Are you, were you an attorney?
No.
No,
No, right,
the good student.
I processed them over.
Oh, you read the packet, that, and you seem to understand a lot about it.
They came about it so.
Somebody try and come after you with zoning and do you wrong in a past life? Skip?
But I was involved in rewriting bylaws for a trade association.
Just shut the computer.
Yeah. Skip, that's just my thing against big,
Oh.
that's nothing.
Oh, she can do all the transfer.
Yeah, she said don't even bother with that.
Don't take things personally.
Yeah, exactly.
Have a good night.
Does anybody